Chapter 275 Surprise Attack. In a deathly silent forest, a shadow that was completely pitch black suddenly walked out from within a large tree. The black figure gradually took 2 steps forward before it squatted down and stretched out a hand to lightly touch the leaves on the ground. After a short while, the black figure frowned and said, "Why has Yang Yes Aura vanished here? Could it be that he can travel through the ground?" The black figure had just finished speaking when his pupils constricted abruptly, and then his figure shook before it vanished mysteriously on the spot and appeared 10 m away. However, when he appeared 10 m away, a light blood-red mark had appeared on his neck. On a tree that was densely covered in leaves, Yang Yi shook his head with regret when he saw the combination of the hidden sword and sword control technique had failed, and then he didn't stay here for another moment, and flashed towards the distance. At such a close distance, the black figure had still been able to avoid his surprise attack, and this clearly showed how terrifying the strength of that King Realm assassin was. In any case, he wasn't able to go against such an opponent right now. Moreover, the assassin had 2 more companions, so he hadn't hesitated at all to retreat. He wanted to summon the army of dark beasts and surround the assassin. However, when he thought about the strange movement technique the assassin possessed, had given up on this thought. The dark beast army was utterly useless without the little fellow, because if the assassin was determined to flee, then both the dark beast army and Yang Yi himself would be unable to do anything but watch helplessly. As he watched Yang Yi vanish from his field of vision, the black figure didn't pursue Yang Yi. He just stood silently on the spot. After a short while, he stretched out his hand and rubbed the blood-red mark on his neck, and a wisp of a solemn expression flashed in his eyes. Right at this moment, 2 black figures that were similarly enveloped beneath black clothes had appeared at both his left and right. When they saw the blood-red mark on his neck, the black figure on the right laughed coldly and said, "Ling Yin, I never expected that you would actually be injured by a profounder at the first heaven realm. What a shame!" The other black figure glanced at the black figure on the right, who ridiculed Ling Yin, and said, "Ling Feng, it isn't the time to fight amongst us. Even though the high-ups sent the 3 of us to assassinate a first heaven realm profounder and were all displeased by this decision, you have to understand that everything would be fine if we succeed. However, if we fail, then we'll probably be unable to hold our heads up high in the league anymore." "Fail?" A wisp of disdain appeared on the corners of Ling Feng's mouth, and he said, "The assassination of a first heaven realm profounder would fail? Ling Feng, you think too highly of Yang Yi. So what if he's the first on the ascension rankings and possesses both sword intent and the enlightened sword heart? It's all useless before me. There's no need for both of you to continue pursuing him. I alone am sufficient." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. Ling Jun shook his head when he saw Ling Feng leave, and then he gazed at Ling Yin and said, "What exactly happened? How were you injured by him?" Ling Yin chuckled and said, "Ling Jun, no wonder your rate of success has been the highest amongst the blood assassins for so many years. I didn't quite understand it in the past because the strengths that you, Ling Feng, and I possess are almost equal. However, you've practically never failed a single assignment, whereas Ling Feng and I were unable to accomplish such a feat. Now, I finally understand a little. It's because of your attitude. You're able to be so cautious even when you're facing a profounder at the first heaven realm, and it's exactly this attitude that both Ling Feng and I are inferior to." Ling Jun said indifferently, "He isn't an ordinary first heaven realm profounder. He possesses 4th level sword intent, the enlightened sword heart, and a physical body comparable to a king-rank dark beast. Moreover, he's even able to utilize a Dao artifact. I don't dare underestimate such strength. He really shouldn't be underestimated." Ling Yin nodded slightly, and then he said, "Earlier, ID almost perished because I underestimated him. As expected of the first on the Ascension rankings. As expected of the future Sword Emperor of the Southern Territory." Ling Jun suddenly asked, "How did he injure you?" Ling Yin smiled mysteriously yet didn't speak a single word before his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. A wisp of a gloomy expression flashed in Ling Jun's eyes when he saw Ling Yin leave, and then he grunted coldly before he vanished on the spot as well. Yan Yi's figure was ceaselessly flickering through the boundless ocean of trees. He was naturally not just fleeing. When facing these assassins, he had to find a suitable opportunity to make a move against them. Otherwise, with the shocking movement technique and various assassination techniques possessed by these assassins, then not to mention killing them, even surviving would be a problem for him. Suddenly Yan Yi stopped moving. He glanced at the surroundings before he nodded lightly. The spot he stood just happened to be a spot that could be utilized to launch a surprise attack. Because he was surrounded by dense rank grass, and the rank grass was over 3 m tall. So, not to mention a single person, even 10 people would be impossible to notice while they hid amongst the rank grass. After pondering deeply for a moment on the spot, Yan Yi flipped his palm, and the sword chest appeared on his palm. With a command in his heart, the 36 swords transformed into rays of light that shot out from within the sword chest and entered amidst the rank grass. After a moment of hesitation, Yan Yi flicked his finger, and then a sword floated in front of him. Moreover, the high-rank technique talisman that Bauer had given him the other day had appeared along with this sword. With a command in his heart, the sword carried the technique talisman along as it flew into the dense leaves above him. After he finished doing all of this, Yan Yi flashed into the rank grass, and then he restrained his aura and fell completely silent. When facing a King Realm assassin, which was one of the elite assassins of the League of Doom, he didn't dare be careless or underestimate his opponents in the slightest. So, he could be said to have utilized all his trump cards for the sake of killing one of these assassins. Of course, if 2 or 3 of them appeared at once, then he would turn around and flee without the slightest hesitation. With the high-grade Strider talismans he possessed, no matter how shocking their movements techniques were, it would still be quite difficult for them to catch up to him. After 2 hours passed by, no one had made an appearance, so Yan Yi continued maintaining the posture of a statue with his aura completely restrained and his eyes closed slightly. In next to no time, 4 hours had passed, 6 hours had passed. However, not a single person had appeared here. Just like this, an entire day had gone by. Yan Yi opened his eyes from amidst the rank grass, and he glanced towards the surroundings through the gaps between the grass. He noticed that the surroundings were deathly silent and completely calm. Yan Yi frowned but didn't move at all because his intuition told him that the quieter it was, the more irregular the situation was. Time slowly trickled by, and another day had passed. Yan Yi was slightly impatient as he resided amongst the rank grass. However, he still didn't move. At this moment, he was very puzzled because he hadn't concealed his aura all along the way. Moreover, not only that, had even left some traces behind on purpose. Logically speaking, they should have caught up by now. But why has there been no sign of anyone for 2 days now? Could it be that those assassins have given up on pursuing me? Or they're already here, and they're waiting for me to show myself just like I'm waiting for them to show themselves? When he thought up to here, the corners of Yan Yi's mouth had curled up slightly to form a strange smile. With a command in his heart, a sword that was hidden before a rock around 15 m away from Yan Yi had suddenly moved lightly and severed a few blades of grass. Right at this moment, an unexpected event occurred. A black shadow suddenly emerged from within an enormous tree, and the black figure shot towards the location of the sword with extremely swift speed. In the shadows, Yan Yi was delighted when he witnessed this scene, and then a wisp of a ruthless expression flashed in his eyes. With a command in his heart, the 36 swords shot into the air and instantly surrounded the black figure, and then they transformed into 36 rays of light that shot explosively towards the black figure. Yan Yi hadn't held back this time, and his 4th-level sword intent covered the heavens and the earth as it enveloped down towards the black figure. At the same time, he swiftly stomped his right foot on the ground, and he relied on the counterforce to shoot forward explosively like a cannonball. Lun Feng's expression changed violently when he witnessed this scene. At this moment, he was naturally aware that had fallen into a trap. Of course, this wasn't the reason that his expression had changed, and it was because of the speed and strength possessed by the 36 swords instead. The speed of the swords was swift to the point he wasn't able to dodge them at all. Moreover, even he had no choice but to fear the terrifying force contained within the swords that were enhanced by Yan Ye's 4th level sword intent. When Head first arrived here, the experience Head accumulated through many years of serving as an assassin had told him that there was something wrong with this place. Because it was too quiet. When he recalled the blood-red mark on Lanine's neck, Head decided to be cautious in the end, and he didn't move around to search for Yang Yi. However, after waiting for so long, even he was slightly impatient, and right when he was about to make a move, he suddenly noticed movement from the grass at the side. When he witnessed this scene, the first thought in his mind was that Yang Yi was unable to persist. After all, Yang Yi wasn't an assassin, so how could Yang Yi possess the patience that he possessed? Thus, he hadn't hesitated to make a move, and then tragedy fell upon him. He didn't even have the time to think before he twisted his wrist, and the dagger in his hand emanated a cold glow as it shot towards Yang Yi, who was charging towards him. On the other hand, he stomped the ground with both his feet and rose into the air. It wasn't that he didn't dare to go head-on with the might contained by those 36 swords, and it was instead because there was no reason. Fleeing immediately upon failure. A smart assassin wouldn't go head-on with the target. A wisp of a cold smile suffused the corners of Yang Ye's mouth when he saw the black figure dodging upwards. With a command in his heart, the sword that was hidden above instantly transformed into a ray of light that shot directly downward. Moreover, the high-rank technique talisman was descending along with the sword. In midair, the technique talisman expanded in midair, and then it instantly transformed into a crescent-shaped blade of wind. After the blade of wind appeared, the large trees in an area of over 10 m in the surroundings had been instantly transformed into innumerable pieces, while the blades of rank grass below were immediately transformed into bits. Lung Feng's eyes were filled with horror when he saw the blade of wind descend abruptly. Never had he imagined that Yang Yi actually possessed a high-rank technique talisman, or that Yang Yi would utilize it in such a manner. It had caused him to be unable to evade now even if he wanted to. The blade of wind resided above him, while the sword formation that carried terrifying strength had surrounded him. Lung Feng was terrified. Fortunately, he wasn't terrified to the point of losing his mind. He took a deep breath while a wisp of a resolute expression flashed in his eyes. The profound energy within his body surged out, and he forcefully stabbed the dagger in his hand at the blade of wind. Bang! The blade of wind collided with Ling Feng, and then Ling Feng instantly fell swiftly from midair. Yang Yi was delighted when he witnessed this scene. Right when he was about to strike the final blow, a dagger suddenly appeared at his neck, and then the hairs on Yang Yi's entire body instantly stood on end. Chapter 276 Kill. Clang! The dagger swept past Yang Yi's neck. However, it was like the dagger had struck hard metal, and it emanated the resounding sound of metal colliding with each other. Ling Jun, who held the dagger, was stunned. Obviously, he hadn't imagined that Yang Yi's physical body would actually be strong to such a terrifying extent. In next to no time, he recovered from his shock, and he didn't hesitate to vanish mysteriously on the spot. In the next moment, Head appeared over 10 m away. Yang Yi had an extremely solemn expression as he watched the black figure vanish from his field of vision. Earlier, if it wasn't for the strength of his physical body, then he would have probably become a headless corpse by now. Perhaps the combat ability of these King Realm assassins wasn't very terrifying. However, he had no choice but to fear their ability when it came to techniques of assassination. Just like the moment that assassin had chosen just now. That moment was exactly the moment where Yang Yi had let his guard down and was the most relaxed. Yet it was exactly this subtle instant that had been accurately grasped by that assassin. Yang Yi took a deep breath and started to become serious. Presently, the assassins were aware that his physical body was formidable, so they would definitely go all out when they attacked next. Of course, he wasn't afraid of them. He was just truly unwilling for what happened earlier to repeat itself and suffer an attack, yet have no choice but to just watch as the enemy left. Such a feeling was truly extremely aggrieving. Yang Yi shook his head, and then he walked slowly towards Ling Feng, who had been stabbed by the 36 swords to the point he seemed like a porcupine. As Yan Yi gazed at Ling Feng's corpse, he issued a command in his heart, and the 36 swords instantly flew back into the sword chest. After that, Yan Yi gestured with his right hand, and the spatial ring on Ling Feng's index finger flew into his palm. Yan Yi shook his head after he took a glance at the content of the spatial ring, and then a wisp of disappointment flashed in his eyes. Besides over 1,000 energy stones, there was nothing else within the spatial ring. Are all of these assassins so poor? Yan Yi glanced at Ling Feng's corpse with disdain, and then he intended to leave. However, right at this moment, his gaze had inadvertently descended onto a red iron token on Ling Feng's waist. After a moment of hesitation, Yan Yi gestured with his right hand, and the red iron token flew into his palm. When he focused his gaze onto the iron token, he noticed that a single scarlet-red character that represented blood was inscribed on the front of the token. After pondering for a moment, Yan Yi had roughly guessed what it was. It was probably a form of identification in the League of Doom. Yan Yi hesitated for a moment before he placed the iron token into his spatial ring because he felt that he might have a use for it in the future. After he finished doing all of this, Yan Yi didn't stay here any longer, and he flashed towards the depths of the Grand Myriad Mountains. After around 15 minutes later, Ling Jun suddenly appeared where Yan Yi stood just now. He glanced at the direction that Yan Yi had left towards before he glanced at Ling Feng's corpse, and he had an extremely solemn expression in his eyes. Earlier, had already arrived here when Ling Feng clashed with Yan Yi, but he hadn't made a move because he was waiting for the best opportunity. In the end, Head found the best opportunity just as Head wished. However, Head never imagined that Yan Yi's physical body was actually strong to such a terrifying extent, and it was even harder than iron. Right at this moment, Ling Yin suddenly appeared by Ling Jun's side. He glanced at Ling Feng's corpse before he frowned, and then he gazed at Ling Jun and said, "You fought him?" Ling Jun nodded and said, "You were right. Yan Yi really does deserve to be the first on the Ascension rankings. His strength is utterly not inferior to an ordinary King Realm expert. Besides the fact that he was careless and had underestimated Yan Yi's own strength was the main reason for Ling Feng's death. No wonder the higher-ups sent all three of us to carry out this assignment. His strength is formidable?" Ling Yin chuckled and said, "That's great. I haven't encountered such an interesting target for many years. Do you know? At the moment I was injured by him that day, that feeling of excitement returned to me once more. The higher-ups promised that we would be able to become Earth assassins in advance if we're able to kill him. But now, even if the higher-ups give up on assassinating him, I would still not give up on assassinating him." Ling Jun glanced indifferently at Ling Yin, and then he said, "I hope you're fully satisfied with the excitement you get from this assassination." As soon as he finished speaking, Ling Jun's figure shook and vanished on the spot. Ling Yin grunted coldly, and then he didn't stay here any longer. His figure flashed towards the distance. Yan Yi was riding Gray swiftly through a plain. All along the way, had been maintaining a high level of vigilance at all times. However, he was slightly depressed because the other two assassins hadn't made another appearance for the last 2 days. However, Yan Yi was sure that they were very close time, and perhaps they were keeping an eye on him from somewhere while waiting for a suitable opportunity to launch a lethal attack. It was exactly because of this reason that he hadn't set up another trap for them throughout these past 2 days. Now, the first thing he had to do wasn't to try and kill them, and it was to escape them and blend into the shadows. Because only in this way would he have an opportunity to kill them. Otherwise, with the strange movement technique they possessed, it would be useless even if he summoned all of the king-rank dark beasts he had. On the other hand, if he wanted to escape them and blend into the shadows, then he had no choice but to summon Gray. With Gray as his means of travel, Yan Yi rode Gray for 2 more days before he intended to start his counterattack. However, right at this moment, the sound of battle suddenly resounded from afar, and it caused Yan Yi to frown. Yan Yi immediately decided to abandon his plans to set up an ambush, and then he placed Gray back into the tiny vortex before he flashed forward. Since there were sounds of battle, then it would definitely be impossible to ambush those two assassins because the assassins would definitely take precautions if they heard the sound of battle. However, Yan Yi was still slightly puzzled because while this place wasn't the depths of the Grand Myriad Mountains, it was at the border of the inner area of the Grand Myriad Mountains. The reason he was able to arrive here was that Gray had led the way, and this place could be said to belong to the dark beasts. If humans were to attack dark beasts here, then it would be no different than courting death. On a hill, two women were standing back to back with swords in their hands while 20 king-rank flame roar lions and the corpses of other flame roar lions covered the ground. When Yang Yi arrived here and saw the corpses that covered the ground, he was instantly astounded. He was clearly aware of the strength possessed by these flame roar lions, yet these two women were actually able to annihilate so many. After all, these two women were merely at the first rank of the king realm. Yan Yi started to size them up. Both of them were around the age of 20 and had pretty appearances. Especially the woman on the left, she possessed a pair of slender and fair legs, a figure that was neither thin nor fat, and while her appearance couldn't be considered to be peerless, it possessed a charm, or its own. Especially when she was encircled by those dark beasts, the faint smile that hung on her face added a little more charm to her. On the other hand, the woman on the right was slightly chubby. Her face was round yet hadn't affected her beauty. Especially the pair of large eyes she possessed, they were extremely bright and beautiful to the point of being unforgettable. In any case, in Yan Yi's opinion, this woman was the first woman had seen that possessed such a figure yet was still pretty. However, the woman's expression was the complete opposite of the faint smile that hung on the face of the woman on the left. At this moment, her expression was solemn while her bright and beautiful eyes flashed with a wisp of worry from time to time. Wei, what should we do? More and more members of this lion pack are arriving as we kill them. We're utterly unable to annihilate them. Once the profound energy within our bodies is exhausted, then this damnable place will be our grave. I don't want to die, nor do I want to become the food of these animals. The slightly chubby woman spoke with slight anxiousness. The woman called Wei grinned and said, "Don't worry, Yan. With Big Sister here, you don't have to worry no matter how many flame roar lions there are." As soon as she finished speaking, she tapped the tip of her toe on the ground, and then her figure shot forward. When Shed shot 3M forward, she suddenly tapped the ground lightly once more, and then her figure spun on the spot. At the same time, the sword in her hand swept out in an extremely natural manner. In an instant, a snow-white strand of sword chi took the form of a crescent as it shot explosively towards 6 king-rank flame roar lions that were standing in front of her. Because they were too huge, they were utterly unable to evade this strand of sword chi, and the sword chi collided with them after that. Hissing sounds erupted as the 6 king-rank dark beasts were instantly transformed into 12 pieces under Yan Yi's astounded gaze. Shed instantly annihilated 6 king-rank dark beasts with a single strike. Of course, Yan Yi was even more shocked because the woman had actually comprehended sword intent. Moreover, it was even 3rd-level sword intent. "Darling, you're amazing." Meanwhile, the woman called Yan suddenly cried out loudly, and then she ran to the woman called Wei before forcefully embracing her. Moreover, she even pecked Wei's cheek. This scene instantly stunned Yang Yi, who was hiding in the shadows. Wei blushed. Right when she was about to say something, the flame roar lions in the surroundings had suddenly roared furiously, and then they pounced ferociously at the two women. Obviously, her actions had infuriated these king-rank dark beasts. Besides that, the entire ground had started to tremble lightly. After that, countless flame roar lions suddenly appeared in the distance, and then they swarmed towards the two women. Both their expressions changed when they witnessed this scene. Even though they possessed extremely formidable strengths, not to mention them, even a spirit realm expert would have no choice but to retreat temporarily when facing such a huge swarm of dark beasts. Wei hesitated for a moment before she decisively grabbed the woman by her side who had been completely scared stiff, and then she leaped up. At the instant she leaped up, a pair of pure white wings that were formed from profound energy had appeared on her shoulder. Right at this moment, a wisp of hesitation flashed in her eyes again, and then she sighed lightly. After that, her figure flashed, and in a few breaths of time, Shed descended onto the spot where Yang Yi was hidden. Yang Yi was stunned when he saw the woman come over abruptly. What does she intend to do? Right when he was puzzled, the woman called Wei Wei had suddenly grabbed his shoulder, and then she soared into the sky and flashed towards the distance. Yang Yi gazed at the dense expanse of dark beasts on the ground below before he glanced at the woman by his side, and then he blinked. This woman is rescuing me? Why is she rescuing me? Could it be that I've encountered a kind-hearted person that only exists in stories? Chapter 277 The Southern Territory is at the bottom. Of course, there was another important question. When did this woman notice him, and why was she able to notice him? Are you a profounder of the Southern Territory? Right when Yang Yi was puzzled, the woman who held his arm had suddenly asked this question. Yang Yi returned to his senses, and then he nodded. Right when he was about to say something, the slightly chubby woman suddenly said with annoyance, "A first heaven realm profounder actually dares to come to the interior of the Grand Myriad Mountains? If my darling wasn't kind-hearted, then you would have become food for those large fellows beneath us." Yang Yi grinned and said, "Both of you are probably not from the Southern Territory, right? How did you know that?" The slightly chubby woman spoke with astonishment. When she heard the slightly chubby woman, the woman by her side who was called Wei Wei glanced at the slightly chubby woman before she shook her head helplessly. This fool. Yang Yi frowned slightly. He was merely probing them, but had never expected that they really weren't from the Southern Territory. If he wasn't wrong, then they had probably come to fight for karmic luck at the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. But why would they have made an appearance in the Grand Myriad Mountains? Hey! You still haven't answered me. How did you know that we aren't from the Southern Territory? The slightly chubby woman was slightly annoyed when she saw Yang Yi remaining silent. Yang Yi returned to his senses, and then he grinned and said, "I guessed. You." The slightly chubby woman clearly didn't believe him, and she instantly glared at him. "All right. Let's first think about how we should escape." Right at this moment, Wei Wei, who was holding on to Yang Yi, and the slightly chubby woman glanced at the flame roar lions that densely covered the ground below as she spoke in a low voice. When she saw the dense expanse of flame roar lions that were pursuing the three of them from the below, the slightly chubby woman's round face had instantly turned slightly ghastly pale. She wasn't afraid of death, but she was afraid of being eaten alive by those dark beasts. It was fine if her head was the first to be eaten because she would die instantly and wouldn't feel any pain. However, if they ate any other part of her like her hands or legs, then just thinking about it caused her face to grow even paler. As he gazed at the dense expanse of dark beasts below them, Yang Yi frowned as well. If the little fellow was here, then he naturally didn't have to fear these dark beasts. But the problem was that the little fellow wasn't able to help him right now. It was undoubtedly impossible for him to deter these flame roar lions by relying on Grey. The Dark Beast Empire respected the strong. No matter if it was in terms of bloodline or strength, Grey was much more inferior to the flame roar lions. Moreover, the flame roar lions had formed an entire swarm. So, he would still be courting death even if he summoned Grey. "Wei Wei, fly quickly. I don't want to be eaten alive." The slightly chubby woman spoke with a slightly trembling voice. Wei Wei shook her head and said, "This technique that transformed profound energy into wings exhausts an extremely huge amount of profound energy, and I don't have much left within me. My profound energy will dry up in 2 hours at most. At that time, we'll probably really become their food. So it's a technique." Yang Yi was enlightened when he heard her. In the beginning, he was extremely puzzled and bewildered when he saw that pair of wings appear. After all, it was something that only spirit realm experts could accomplish. "Hey! Do you have any way out of this?" Right when Yang Yi was in deep through, the round-faced woman suddenly gazed at him and said, "Since you dared to come here on your own, you definitely have something to rely on, right? If you really have some sort of technique that can save us, then stop hiding it." Wei Wei turned her head to gaze at Yang Yi. Obviously, she felt that the round-faced woman made sense. Yang Yi remained silent. He really did have a way out of this predicament because he just had to summon the lightning eagle, and he could escape the flame roar lions beneath them. However, he truly didn't want to expose the lightning eagle before those assassins who were hiding in the shadows. If outsiders found out that he, Yan Yi, even possessed a flying dark beasts, then he would probably be unable to rest in peace forever. Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that if he summoned the lightning eagle, then he would have to do it in front of these two women. Not only would such an action be world-shocking, but it was also very likely that the mysterious tiny vortex would be exposed. So, Yang Yi shook his head before their gazes of anticipation. Right when he was about to say something, the slightly chubby woman had suddenly burst into tears, and she hugged Wei Wei tightly as she cried. Wei Wei, I don't want to die. I still want to become an inner court disciple of the Heavenly Sword sect. I still want to marry senior brother Yuan Gaishio, and I want to give birth to many children for him. The corners of Yang Yi's mouth twitched when he heard this. He was truly speechless. Wei Wei shook her head while a helpless expression covered her face. She said, Yan, when can you start acting a bit more normally? If you continue acting like this, then not to mention senior brother Yuan, even the janitor of the sect wouldn't dare marry you. Wei Wei, you. Yan had become slightly angry from embarrassment. She seemed to have forgotten that Yang Yi was on the other side, and she shoved her face into Wei Wei's chest and started ceaselessly moving her head left and right. As she did that, she said, Darling, it seems to have grown bigger. This won't do. I can't be smaller than you. Once I return to the sect, you'll go look for 1,000-year-old ice string papaya. That's not enough. If I have the chance, you'll ask senior brother Yuan to give me a good massage as well. The corners of Yang Yi's mouth twitched incessantly. This woman is truly terrifying. Wei Wei's face flushed red, and she glanced at Yan as she said, You damnable little girl. How could you say such things? Don't you know that there's someone else here? Hey, stop it! I'll toss you down and feed you to the dark beasts if you continue moving your head like that. Such a threat was truly too great to her. She hurriedly stopped, and then she tilted her round face to glance at Yang Yi. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something, and her eyes lit up as she said, Darling, I've thought of a method to escape. Yang Yi suddenly had a bad feeling when he heard this, whereas Wei Wei asked with delight, What method? Yan withdrew her claws from Wei Wei's chest, and then she pointed at Yang Yi and said, Darling, if we toss him down to draw the attention of those dark beasts, then wouldn't we have time to flee? Yang Yi's face darkened when he heard this. Can she not be a little secretive? I'm still right here. Wei Wei was first stunned, and then she turned her head to glance at Yang Yi. She pondered deeply for a moment before she said, You're clearly aware of the situation we face right now. Since someone like you who's at the first heaven realm dared to travel deep into the Grand Myriad Mountains, then I presume you definitely have the ability to take care of your own life. We sisters will be eternally grateful if you're willing to lend us a hand. Yang Yi felt silent. In all honesty, he didn't have any ill feelings towards these two women. To be precise, he had a slightly good impression of them. Because they didn't confront him for hiding and watching them from the shadows, and they'd even tried to rescue him. Especially because they were both King Realm experts while he was merely at the First Heaven Realm. Under such circumstances, not only had they not expressed contempt and detest towards him, they even took the trouble to try and rescue him. This caused him to have a slightly good impression of them. However, he could absolutely not summon the lightning eagle because the implications were too severe. When they saw Yang Yi remain silent, both of them remained silent as well. At this moment, they could only place their hopes on Yang Yi. If Yang Yi still shook his head, then they would probably be eaten here. Never mind, I can't just do nothing and refuse to help them. Yang Yi grinned. However, right when he was about to summon the lightning eagle, Yan had suddenly shouted loudly before she pointed ahead with excitement. She said, Darling, it's senior brother Yan Han and the others. They've come to save us. Ha ha. We're finally able to escape danger. When he heard this, Yang Yi looked over, and he saw 7 people with wings formed from profound energy were flying swiftly towards them from 300 m away. Yang Yi frowned once more when he saw these people. Shouldn't these geniuses from the other territories have headed to the ancient battlefield? Why have they come to the Grand Myriad Mountains? Wei Wei raised her head and looked over. When she saw their appearances, she instantly heaved a sigh of relief in her heart, while she revealed a faint smile on her face. In less than a few breaths of time, those 7 profounders had arrived in front of Yan Yi's group of 3. The person in the lead of the group of 7 was a young man around the age of 20. He had sharp and slanted brows, starry eyes, a flat and wide nose, and a ramrod straight figure. As he stood there, the light breeze from the surroundings blew on his ink-black hair, and it caused him to seem indescribably charming and unrestrained. The young man instantly revealed a pleasant smile when he saw Wei Wei, and then he said, "Junior Sister Lu, we've finally found you. Hey, senior brother Yan Han, I'm here as well. Don't forget me when you see the woman you like, alright? Watch out or I'll ask my darling to pay no attention to you." Yan suddenly spoke with displeasure. Yan Han moved his gaze from Lu Weiwei and gazed at Yan before he said with a smile, "How could I dare forget junior sister Kai Yan?" When he spoke up to here, he turned to look at Yang Yi before he said, "Who's this brother?" "He's a profounder from the southern territory that we picked up in the Grand Myriad Mountains." Kai Yan said, "Senior brother Yan Han, you said that I'm very bold in the past, but let me tell you that he's even bolder than me. He hasn't even attained the King Realm, yet he actually dared to travel deep into the Grand Myriad Mountains by himself. If he hadn't encountered Wei Wei and me, then he would have probably died a long time ago. A profounder from the southern territory? The first heaven realm?" Yan Han was stunned when he heard Kai Yan, and then he gazed at Yang Yi and said, "You're a profounder from the southern territory?" Yang Yi nodded. When they saw Yang Yi nod, a wisp of contempt instantly flashed in the eyes of Yan Han and the other 6 men behind him. One of the men behind him even said bluntly, "I never imagined that we would actually encounter a profounder from the southern territory in advance." According to rumor, the profounders of the southern territory are at the bottom of the ladder in strength when compared to all the other territories. "It isn't a rumor." Yan Han glanced indifferently at Yang Yi, and he interrupted the man as he said, "For the last 1,000 years, the southern territory has always been at the bottom. Especially during the last few rounds, the so-called monstrous geniuses of the southern territory were actually not even able to ascend the first level of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda." When he spoke up to here, Yan Han suddenly chuckled and said, "I heard a so-called quasi-sword emperor has appeared in the southern territory. Not only has he comprehended 4th-level sword intent, but he has also attained the enlightened sword heart. Ha ha! How could such a savage place have someone that has attained the enlightened sword heart? What a huge joke! After all, my heavenly sword sect is a 3rd-rank sect that possesses countless geniuses in the sword Tao. However, there hasn't been a single disciple that has attained the enlightened sword heart. So, how could one appear in the southern territory?" Chapter 278 Horde of Dark Beasts. Right, how could someone with the enlightened sword heart appear in a savage place like the southern territory? Not to mention our heavenly sword sect, I've never even heard of one from the immortal sword sect that's a 5th-rank sect. These profounders of the southern territory don't even use their brains when they boast. One of the men by Yan Han's side chimed in, and he glanced intentionally at Yang Yi once he finished speaking. How could Yang Yi not realize that their words were directed at him? Yang Yi wasn't one to grin and bear with the insults of others. So, he immediately glanced at Yan Han and the other young man before he said, "Both of you said that it's impossible for one with the enlightened sword heart to appear in the southern territory. Then could it be that the founding ancestor of the southern territory's sword sect from 10,000 years ago wasn't one who had attained the enlightened sword heart?" Yan Han and the other young man's expressions turned slightly unsightly when they heard this. The sword sect's founding ancestor had once crushed the geniuses of all the other territories to the point they were convinced of their inferiority, so Yan Han and the others were naturally aware of this. There was a list outside the Hidden Dragon Pagoda, and it was called the Hidden Dragon List. Only the names of profounders who had entered the 5th level, which was the highest level of the pagoda, would appear on the hidden dragon list. After countless years of time, only the names of 7 people were on the hidden dragon list, and the sword sect's founding ancestor, the unfettered one, was second on the list. Yan Yi's actions of mentioning the sword sect's founding ancestor was undoubtedly like slapping the two of them on the face. Yan Han's eyes narrowed slightly before he said, "So, you mean that person called Yan Yi has really comprehended the enlightened sword heart?" Lu Weiwei's beautiful brows had knit together slightly when she saw that the other members of her sect seemed to be targeting Yan Yi, and then she said, "Senior brother Yan, let's deal with those dark beasts below us first. It's just a group of animals." Yan Han grunted coldly, and a wisp of a smile had appeared on his face when he gazed at Lu Weiwei. He said, "There's no need to be anxious, junior sister Lu. Even though they are huge in number, they're just some brainless animals. Just watch how senior brother breaks open the stomachs of these dark beasts and retrieves their inner cores. Their inner cores are truly treasures." As soon as he finished speaking, Yan He suddenly turned to look at Yan Yi while a wisp of an evil smile arose on the corners of his mouth. He said, "Friend, since you dared to step foot into the Grand Myriad Mountains while at the First Heaven Realm, I presume you have some sort of shocking ability. It just so happens that we haven't met any geniuses from the Southern Territory. So, how about you show us a little of your strength so we can see how formidable the monstrous geniuses of the Southern Territory are, alright? Yeah, show us a little. Let us see exactly how weak, strong the profounders of the Southern Territory are." "Ha ha! Forget it. He's only at the First Heaven Realm in the end. So, not to mention a group of king-rank dark beasts, he's probably not even able to deal with one. How could that be possible? Since he dared to enter the Grand Myriad Mountains while he's only at the First Heaven Realm, then he definitely possesses some sort of shocking trump card. Perhaps he's that goddamn fellow from the Southern Territory that obtained the first position on the Ascension rankings, Yan Yi, who possesses the enlightened sword heart." Ha ha! When he heard all of them, Yan Han feigned surprise and glanced at Yan Yi before he asked, "You wouldn't really be Yan Yi who possesses the enlightened sword heart, right?" Yan Yi glanced indifferently at them before he chuckled and said, "My name really is Yang Yi." Yan Han was stunned, and then he roared with laughter. He laughed for a while before he said, "You're Yang Yi? Yang Yi who possesses the enlightened sword heart? Ha ha! Come! Come! Let us see exactly how formidable a genius who possesses the enlightened sword heart is. Ha ha! Enough!" Right at this moment, Lu Weiwei, who had remained silent until now, had suddenly shouted furiously. She glanced at Yan Yi before she turned to gaze at Yan Han, and then he said, "Senior brother Yan, even though his cultivation is low, you still shouldn't ridicule and mock him like this. You weren't like this in the past." Kai Yan was unable to continue watching as well, and she immediately said, "Senior brother Yan, even though this kid's strength is slightly weak, his appearance is slightly ugly, and he's from the Southern Territory. But he hasn't done anything bad to us in the end, so why do you have to bully the weak?" If others heard that a group of disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect had bullied a profounder at the First Heaven Realm, then wouldn't it be extremely humiliating? Yang Yi rolled his eyes. What does she mean by slightly ugly? Does she know how to speak? Yan Han's expression grew slightly unsightly when he heard them, and as he gazed at Yang Yi, a wisp of a gloomy expression flashed in the depths of his eyes. However, when he looked at Lu Weiwei and Kai Yan, he revealed an extremely gentle smile instead and said, "Junior sisters are right, senior brother was mistaken. Let's not talk about all of this and deal with the group of beasts below us." When he spoke up to hear, he glanced at Yang Yi and said indifferently, "Stay at the side later and don't move about rashly, otherwise don't blame us if you die." Yang Yi shook his head. He was just about to speak when the ground in the distance started to quake violently. Subsequently, a large and dense black cloud had suddenly appeared in the sky, and when it came slightly close, the expressions of Yan Han and the others had changed violently because it wasn't a black cloud but countless flying dark beasts. It wasn't just the sky, there were countless dark beasts on the ground as well, and it was impossible to see the end of them. This time, Yen Han and the others revealed expressions of terror. If it was a few hundred or even 1,000, then they would still be able to flee if they wanted. But if it was this many, then not to mention them, even a spirit realm expert would probably be unable to escape. We're doomed! We're doomed! As she gazed at the horde of dark beasts that blotted out the sky and covered the ground, Kai Yan had a ghastly pale countenance as she muttered, "We're really finished. Senior Brother Yuan, I'm really going to be eaten by these dark beasts this time. Senior Brother Yuan, save me." Right at this moment, an enormous rock arrived around 60 m away from Yen Han and the others. There was a young man in a luxurious robe standing on the head of the rock. Yan Yi was slightly stunned when he saw this young man because it was none other than that mysterious dark beast from the Grand Myriad Mountains, Luo Shui. The Northern Territory? Luo Shui spoke indifferently from atop the rock. Yen Han didn't dare act proudly and immediately nodded before he said, "Exactly." Luo Shui grunted coldly and said, "Why didn't all of you head to the ancient battlefield and have come to my Grand Myriad Mountains instead?" Yen Han was instantly slightly annoyed when he heard Luo Shui's questioning tone. However, he didn't dare flare up and could only suppress the rage in his heart before he said, "We didn't come here with any ill intent. It's merely because a slight mishap occurred when 2 of our junior sisters were teleported, and they were teleported to the Grand Myriad Mountains. So, we came to look for them. No ill intent?" A wisp of a cold smile arose on the corners of Luo Shui's mouth, and he said, "In a short period of a single day, over 1,000 king-rank dark beasts of my Grand Myriad Mountains were killed. I presume there are hundreds of king-rank inner cores within all of your spatial rings, right? This is what you mean by coming here without any ill intent and merely to look for someone." Yen Han hadn't expected that what they'd done would actually have been noticed, nor had he imagined that the Grand Myriad Mountains would dispatch so many dark beasts to pursue them. His heart immediately shook, and then he glanced at the surroundings. After that, his gaze descended onto Lu Weiwei. His gaze flickered a little while he hesitated for a long time, and then he took a deep breath as he decided in his heart. When he saw Yen Han remain silent, Luo Shui's gaze turned icy cold, and he said, "Since you refuse to speak, then all of you can pay with your lives." As soon as he finished speaking, he was about to command the horde of dark beasts to attack. However, right at this moment Yen Han suddenly flipped his palm, and then a talisman appeared out of thin air, and then Yen Han's figure vanished mysteriously on the spot. Everyone was stunned upon witnessing this scene, and this included Luo Shui. He vanished just like that? It's a random teleportation talisman. Right at this moment, someone from amongst the disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect said, "I never expected that Senior Brother Yen Han actually possessed a random teleportation talisman. Haha. Even more surprising is that he actually completely disregarded all of us in the face of danger, and he fled without saying a thing to us. Haha." Kai Yen felt slight disbelief and said, "Senior Brother Tui, that dog Yen is actually such a person? That piece of shit trash. To think I called him my senior brother for so many years and even cooked for him. Oh. How fucking infuriating. Weiwei, it's fortunate that you've never agreed to his pursuit, otherwise you would regret it forever." Lu Weiwei shook her head while a wisp of disappointment flashed in her eyes. She had a slight good impression of Yen Han, but she had never imagined that he would act in such a way during a moment of life and death. Yen Han fleeing abruptly was definitely quite a blow to these disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect. While they were in the sect, Yen Han had always been very good at playing the role of senior brother. However, they'd never imagined that this senior brother had always been extremely good to everyone, would actually not hesitate to abandon them and flee by himself. Amongst the people present here, it was probably Yang Yi who was the most understanding. Because had seen numerous people like Yen Han. Yen Han couldn't be said to be wrong. After all, even ants wanted to drag out their tiny existence, let alone humans. Of course, Yang Yi wasn't capable of abandoning his friends. Even though he was very cold-blooded at most times and could even be said to be selfish, He was absolutely unable to abandon his friends so that he could survive. Not everything in the world could go as one wanted, and the only thing important was a clear conscience. No matter what Yang Yi did, he always strived to maintain a clear conscience. This is what the monstrous geniuses of the other territories are like. Luo Shui shook his head lightly and spoke in a light voice. Right at this moment, Lu Weiwei took a deep breath before she flipped her palm, and a sword appeared in her hand. She said, "Disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, heed my call. Form the sword formation." After Yan Han left, Lu Weiwei had become the most senior amongst them, so they didn't hesitate at all upon hearing her. Their figures flashed to stand around Lu Weiwei before they withdrew their swords. At the same time, a strand of terrifying sword chi suddenly surged out from the swords in their hands, and then it formed a strange vortex of sword chi. Chapter 279. The little fellow is about to awaken. The members of the Heavenly Sword Sect were ready to die, so they didn't hold back at all, and the profound energy within their bodies surged out like a torrent. With the profound energy within them surging madly into the vortex of sword chi, it revolved faster and faster while growing larger and larger. Moreover, the terrifying sword chi contained within it was extremely sharp to the point it was impossible to look directly at it. Yan Yi had a slightly solemn expression as he gazed at the sword formation they'd formed. Even though he didn't have a good impression of them, he had no choice but to admit that they were very strong. Especially the sword formation, the terrifying energy contained within it was something that even he really feared. However, while they faced the dense horde of dark beasts within the Grand Myriad Mountains, it was useless no matter how formidable that vortex of sword chi was. Not to mention that the mysterious Luo Shui was present here as well. In other words, they were utterly unable to avoid death. These disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect seemed to be aware that they couldn't avoid death, so they had resolute expressions. Of course, there was even more fear and sorrow on their faces. Regardless of whether it was humans or dark beasts, would anyone not wish to live if it was possible? Luo Shui grunted coldly as he gazed at the vortex-shaped sword formation the members of the Heavenly Sword Sect had created. Right when he was about to give the order to attack, his gaze had suddenly glanced over inadvertently and noticed Yang Yi, who was standing behind the members of the Heavenly Sword Sect. Luo Shui frowned when he saw Yang Yi, and then he said, "It's you!" The members of the Heavenly Sword Sect were stunned when they heard this, and then they gazed at Yang Yi with puzzled expressions in their eyes. Yang Yi was first stunned when he heard Luo Shui speak to him, and then he laughed bitterly. The little fellow can't show itself right now. So how would I flee if Luo Shui intends to make a move against me? Yang Yi didn't give it any further thought. He strode forward, gazed at Luo Shui, and then he said, "The last time we met, you led countless dark beasts to surround me, but I never imagined that our next meeting would be under similar circumstances. Could it be that we're bound to rival each other?" Luo Shui chuckled, and then he glanced at Yang Yi's shoulder before he said, "Where is it?" Yang Yi frowned when he heard this. He was naturally aware of who Luo Shui was speaking about. Could it be that the Dark Beast Empire still hasn't stopped targeting the little fellow? As if he knew what Yang Yi thought, Luo Shui continued, "I'm just asking about it, and I have no intention to make a move against it." When he spoke up to hear, Luo Shui hesitated for a moment before he said, "If it's possible, then can you ask it to come out and meet me?" Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Luo Shui. If Luo Shui really intended to target the little fellow, then he would be in danger. Because Yang Yi would definitely perish before this dense expanse of dark beasts if he didn't possess the assistance of the little fellow's bloodline pressure. Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment, and then he shook his head and said, "Not right now." Luo Shui didn't get angry because of this. He merely nodded lightly before he glanced at the disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect who stood by Yang Yi's side. He said, "Are they your friends?" When they heard Luo Shui, the hearts of those disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect shook. Even an idiot would be able to discern that the relationship between Yang Yi and Luo Shui wasn't ordinary. In other words, their fate was probably in Yang Yi's hands. However, When they recalled the scene of them ridiculing and mocking Yang Yi just now, the bitterness of their faces grew even denser. Yang Yi had discerned the meaning behind Luo Shue's words as well. However, he understood that Luo Shue was absolutely not giving him face, and Luo Shue was giving the little fellow face instead. Otherwise, not to mention these disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect, Luo Shue would probably annihilate him as well. Yang Yi glanced at them before he said indifferently, "They aren't." What a joke! Yang Yi wasn't one that repaid enmity with kindness. He liked to repay evil with evil. Their expressions instantly became unsightly when they heard Yang Yi. Right at this moment, Yang Yi suddenly pointed at Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan, and then he said, "These two are." Luo Shui glanced at them, and then he glanced at Yang Yi before he said, "The three of you can leave." Yang Yi nodded. Right when he was about to leave, Lu Weiwei suddenly blocked his path and was about to say something. However, Yang Yi shook his head before she could speak and said, "Their fate has nothing to do with me. Save those idiots from the Heavenly Sword sect?" What a joke! Yang Yi wasn't a kind-hearted or magnanimous person, and if he wasn't worried about those two assassins, then he would have summoned his army of dark beasts and annihilated these fellows. Meanwhile, Kai Yanyan gazed at Yang Yi and said, "Hey, even though they'd gone a bit too far just now, their mistakes don't warrant death. Moreover, didn't my darling apologize on their behalf? As a man, you can't be so petty, otherwise, I would really look down upon you." "It's my mistake?" Yang Yi felt extreme disdain towards Kai Yanyan's words. If it wasn't out of consideration for the fact that she'd spoken on his behalf earlier, he really wanted to just leave. "Friend." Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei said, "The actions and words of these fellow disciples of mine were wrong, but just as Yanyan said, their mistakes don't warrant death. All of us will definitely be eternally grateful if you lend us a hand." As she spoke, she bowed to Yang Yi. Yang Yi sighed. There was no relationship between this woman and him, yet she was still able to lend him a hand. Even though he didn't need it at the time, he couldn't deny that her actions had made him have a good impression of her. So, that was the reason why he was willing to save her. As for these disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect, Yang Yi raised his head to glance at the other disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect, and then he suddenly said, "Do you think they will be grateful to me after I save them?" Lu Weiwei was stunned, and then she looked at them. At this moment, even though they hadn't revealed an embarrassing appearance, their countenances were still ghastly pale while the terror and horror in their eyes were not concealed at all. Of course, the most important aspect was the gazes they looked at Yang Yi with. Yes, their gazes towards Yang Yi didn't carry even a shred of a guilty or pleading expression. Their eyes only had an icy cold expression within them, and there was even a little resentment amidst their cold expressions. They were extraordinary geniuses of the Northern Territory. They were the youngest King Realm experts in the Northern Territory. They enjoyed countless forms of glory, yet their fate was actually in the hands of a First Heaven Realm profounder. How could they accept this? The thing geniuses lacked the least was pride. So, even if it was at a moment of life and death, they hadn't spoken out to see assistance from Yang Yi. Lu Weiwei sighed when she saw their expressions, and then she turned to look at Yang Yi before she said, "Don't worry, I won't allow them to repay kindness with enmity. Please." Yang Yi gazed at Lu Weiwei for a short while before he gazed at Luo Shui, and then Luo Shui immediately said indifferently, "You intend to protect all of them?" Yang Yi shrugged and said, "It can't be helped, I owe her a favor. Being greedy isn't good." Luo Shui looked Yang Yi straight in the eye as he spoke. "You ought to be clearly aware that you're unable to stop me if I want to leave." Yang Yi met Luo Shui's gaze and spoke in an indifferent tone. These words were purely a bluff. If the little fellow had awakened, then Luo Shui would definitely be unable to stop him from leaving. But the problem was that the little fellow hadn't awakened. Luo Shui frowned. Even though he was extremely annoyed by Yang Yi's words, he had to admit that he was really unable to stop Yang Yi while that mysterious little fellow was by Yang Yi's side. It was even to the extent that if the mysterious little fellow joined forces with those disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect, then it would definitely be an enormous calamity for the dark beasts in the surroundings. When they saw Luo Shui fall silent, the hearts of disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect had constricted. They didn't want to die in the end. Of course, if it was possible to live, then would anyone be willing to die? However, at this moment, they couldn't avoid death just because they wanted to. Their fate was entire in Luo Shui's hands. So, when they saw Luo Shui fall silent, they couldn't help but become anxious. As for why Luo Shui had fallen silent and hesitated, they'd unconsciously forgotten this key point. Actually, Yang Yi was slightly nervous right now as well. If Luo Shui really made a move against them, then he could only turn around and flee. Because he couldn't resist the dense horde of dark beasts without the little fellow by his side. As for Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan, cold sweat had even seeped out from their hands. At this moment, they didn't consider why Luo Shui was giving Yang Yi face, and it wasn't just them, even the other disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect hadn't thought about this. At this moment, they were only thinking of a single thing, and it was about whether they could avoid death. After a short while, Luo Shui looked at Yang Yi and said, "You're heading to the ancient battlefield?" Yang Yi was stunned. He didn't know why Luo Shui had suddenly asked this question, but he didn't conceal it, and nodded before he said, "How could I not go and witness such a grand event?" Luo Shui suddenly smiled when he heard this, and then he said, "Fine, I won't take their lives for now. We'll meet again at the ancient battlefield. I hope you'll be able to give me an even more extraordinary surprise at that time." "You're heading to the ancient battlefield as well?" Yang Yi frowned as he spoke. "Of course," Luo Shui said. "This is a grand event of the entire continent, so how could my Dark Beast Empire not attend?" As soon as he finished speaking, Luo Shui glanced at the disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect and said, "If you don't leave the Grand Myriad Mountains in 4 hours of time, then don't leave forever. Remember, the Grand Myriad Mountains doesn't welcome people from the other territories." As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't stay here any longer, and he led the countless dark beasts to withdraw like the tide. The members of the Heavenly Sword sect instantly heaved sighs of relief when they saw Luo Shui lead the dark beasts away. No matter what, they finally didn't have to die at a place that was far away from home. "Thank you." Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei gazed at Yang Yi as she spoke. Yang Yi shook his head, and then he gazed at the members of the other Heavenly Sword sect and said, "There's no need for that. You lent me a hand earlier, so I lent you a hand now. We can be considered to be even now." "Right, just as you said, I hope." When he spoke up to hear, Yang Yi's expression suddenly changed. After that, a wisp of wild joy surged into his eyes. Because right at that instant just now, had sensed that the violet barrier of light which covered the little fellow had suddenly started to tremble. In other words, the little fellow was about to awaken. Chapter 280, Repaying Kindness with Evil. "I have other matters to attend to, so will be taking my leave." After he noticed that the little fellow was about to awaken, Yang Yi didn't want to stay here any longer and intended to leave. Presently, he just wanted to find a quiet place and wait for the little fellow to awaken. The women were stunned. However, right when they were about to say something, the other 6 disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect who stood behind them had flashed over to surround Yang Yi, who was about to leave. Yang Yi's eyes narrowed when he saw them surround him. He glanced at the 6 of them before he spoke with ridicule. "What? This is how your Heavenly Sword sect treats someone that saved your lives? What are all of you doing?" Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei walked over to Yang Yi's side, and then she glared angrily at these fellow disciples of hers. Obviously, their actions had infuriated her. "Senior Sister Lu, don't interfere in this matter." A slightly fat man amongst the 6 of them spoke in a low voice. "We disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect suffered such a humiliation today. If he were to spread the news of it, then our Heavenly Sword sect would become the laughingstock of the entire Profounder continent. At that time, all of us would have committed a crime against the sect." "Exactly. If the members of the other territories knew that we'd actually relied on a First Heaven Realm Profounder of the Southern Territory to plead on our behalf and save our lives, then we wouldn't just bring shame to the Heavenly Sword sect, we would have brought shame to the entire Northern Territory as well." So, he can't be allowed to live. He's just a profounder at the first heaven realm, and he's even from a lousy place like the Southern Territory. I was already annoyed by him since the beginning, so he deserves death. Since they were able to come to the Southern Territory, it was already sufficient to prove the potential and strength they possessed, and it was exactly because of this that they would feel humiliated when they had to rely on Yan Yi to plead on their behalf in order to survive. In their eyes, a profounder at the first heaven realm was no different than an ant, but they'd relied on an ant to survive just now. How could they who boasted about being extraordinary geniuses of the Southern Territory endure something like this? So, at the moment that Luo Shui had left, they'd very tacitly chosen to act against Yan Yi. As he gazed at those disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect who didn't conceal their killing intent at all, Yan Yi grinned, and then he gazed at Lu Weiwei who was about to speak and said, "Look, at most times, one must never try to be a good person. Right, besides that I have to say that all of you disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect are really trash. First, that senior brother of yours abandoned all of you and left. Now, these ungrateful fellows intend to act against the person who saved their lives. Alas, if I knew this would happen, then I should have allowed them to become food for those dark beasts. What do you think? You regret it now?" The slightly fat young man sneered and said, "I don't know why you're able to negotiate with that mysterious shape-shifted dark beast, but it isn't important anymore. The important thing is that you must die here today. Don't say that I didn't give you a chance. You can choose any one of the 6 of us. So long as you're able to survive 3 moves and count out 10 times to every single one of the 6 of us, then I'll spare your life. All right?" "Ha ha!" The other disciples instantly roared with laughter when they heard him, and they laughed in an extremely arrogant and complacent manner. "Huan Yan, do you really intend to act in this way?" Lu Weiwei gazed at the slightly fat young man while her gaze had turned slightly cold. The slightly fat young man called Huan Yan seemed to be slightly fearful of Lu Weiwei, and he immediately restrained the arrogant expression on his face before he said, "Senior Sister Lu, all of us really respect you, and we don't want to go against your intentions. However, this is related to the reputation of our Heavenly Sword sect and the Northern Territory. So, I hope that Senior Sister Lu doesn't interfere in this matter. The 6 of us will naturally apologize and seek out punishment from Senior Sister Lu once we're done here." Lu Weiwei sighed, and then she said, "Huan Yan, you're not an idiot. Could it be that you haven't noticed?" "Noticed what?" Huan Yan frowned. Lu Weiwei shook his head, and then she glanced at Huan Yan with slight disappointment before she said, "Since the army of dark beasts surrounded us until the moment that the 6 of you surrounded him, his expression has remained extremely calm from the beginning until the end. He hasn't revealed even a trace of nervousness or fear. Is this normal? Moreover, why would that mysterious shape-shifted dark beast from before give him face? He's just a profounder at the first heaven realm, so why would he dare to travel to the central region of the Grand Myriad Mountains by himself? Have you thought about all of this?" Lu Weiwei had said all of this in front of Yan Yi, and she hadn't concealed it from him at all. So Yan Yi's gaze towards her had changed upon hearing all of this, because he realized that had slightly underestimated this woman. Huan Yan and the other 5 disciples fell silent. They weren't idiots. They'd overlooked all of this because of those dark beasts just now, but now that Lu Weiwei had mentioned it, they'd thought about it for a moment and noticed that it really was unusual. A first heaven realm profounder dared to head deep into the central region of the Grand Myriad Mountains and remain without the slightest shred of nervousness or fear while facing all of them who were King Realm experts. Was this because he was brave? Or perhaps because he had some sort of shocking trump card? After a short while, a wisp of a savage expression flashed through Huan Yan's eyes, and he said, "No matter what trump card he possesses, he's only at the first heaven realm, and he doesn't even have the ability to fight back in front of us. If we don't eliminate him now, then we would be finished if he exposes what happened here today. Attack! Let me see who dares to do that." Right at this moment, Lu Weiwei flipped her palm, and her sword appeared in her hand before she pointed it at those disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect. "Senior Sister Lu, You intend to make a move against us for a piece of trash from the Southern Territory who has no relationship with you. Huan Yen had a slightly unsightly expression as he spoke in a low voice. Lu Weiwei paid no attention to Huan Yen, and she said to Yang Yi instead, "Leave, quickly! It'll stop them." "Can you stop them?" Yang Yi sighed as he glanced at her. In the past, he didn't believe that a purely kind person existed in the world because had never encountered such a person. No matter if it was Elder Mu, his master Lin Shan, Su Qinshi, or Qin Xie, all of them had only come into contact with him because of his natural talent or other benefits. So, he didn't believe that a purely kind-hearted person existed in the world. However, after he encountered this woman, his thoughts were shaken. Needless to say, even though he didn't need the woman's help or protection, it caused Yang Yi to have a strange feeling. It wasn't a feeling of like or love, and he just felt that this woman could become his friend. A person would definitely encounter all sorts of people throughout one's lifetime. Many of these people would become one's friends, but even more would just become passerby. Yet now, he had a feeling that he didn't to be a passerby in her life, or it could be said that he didn't want her to be a passerby in his life. Yes, every single person should have a friend that didn't mind one's appearance, status, or wealth. Yang Yi took a deep breath before he shook his head and chuckled. He disregarded those disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect before he gazed at Lu Weiwei and said, "Allow me to introduce myself. Yang Yi from South Peace City." When he spoke these words, he suddenly felt his entire body become light. After that, his eyes gradually opened wide before his eyes were filled with shock and pleasant surprise. Yang Yi had always advanced courageously when it came to the sword Dao, and had never hesitated or given up. When it came to love, had hesitated and even felt a feeling of inferiority. However, had changed later on. So, he dared to loudly proclaim his love to Su Qinshi, and he dared to loudly promise that he would come to the sword sect to get her in the future. That change had allowed his mental state to improve, and it had allowed his sword intent to advance into the 4th level. It was also at that time which Yang Yi had understood a principle. That principle was that regardless of whether it was love, friendship, or the sword Dao, one should advance courageously and never hesitate or give up. To put it in simpler terms, if one felt affection, then one should speak of it and act on it. To put it in even simpler terms, one should face the thoughts in one's heart without holding back at all. When facing an enemy, since the enemy caused one pain, then one should cause even more pain to the enemy. When facing someone that one liked, then affection was affection. There was no need to conceal it or fake it, and it should be proclaimed loudly. Just like this very moment, he wanted to become friends with her, so he didn't hesitate to speak. Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that Head understood something of utmost importance at that instant just now, and it was that he should face the intentions in his heart. Because he understood this, he noticed that Head attained the 5th level of sword intent after he spoke those words. Yes, Head attained the 5th level of the sword intent now. The sword intent was an unreal and ethereal thing. There was no method or technique to improve it, and there was only a single way to improve it: the improvement of one's mental state. Only the improvement or transformation of one's mental state would allow sword intent to improve along with it. However, the improvement of the mental state was even more difficult to attain than sword intent. Those disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect were stunned. Has this fellow gone mad? He's actually introducing himself now? But why does his name sound so familiar? Lu Weiwei was stunned as well. She hadn't expected that Yang Yi would actually introduce himself to her at this moment. What does he intend to do? Could it be that he isn't aware of the situation he's in right now? At this moment, Lu Weiwei had the impulse to bash Yang Yi up. "Hey, have you gone mad from fear?" Meanwhile, Kai Yanyan suddenly patted Yang Yi on the shoulder and said, "It's already at a time like this, yet you aren't fleeing quickly but have introduced yourself instead? Yang Yi? Yang!" When she spoke up to hear, she suddenly gazed at Yang Yi with disbelief, and then the corners of her mouth twitched slightly as she said, You You are that Yan Yi from the Southern Territory who's said to be the quasi-sword emperor that has comprehended 4th-level sword intent and attained the enlightened sword heart? When they heard her, those other disciples were instantly stunned, and then their gazes towards Yan Yi were filled with shock and bewilderment. Yan Yi was actually quite famous, because he possessed 4th-level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart. Especially the enlightened sword heart, because not to mention the entire Southern Territory, it was extraordinarily rare even throughout the entire profounder continent. In any case, even if it was in the history of the Heavenly Sword sect, only a single person had attained the enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. That person was the Heavenly Sword sect's founding ancestor. Moreover, after the founding ancestor of the Heavenly Sword sect, not a single disciple from the Heavenly Sword sect had attained the enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. Yet now, one had appeared before them. After feeling shocked, besides Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan, the other 6 disciples exchanged glances, and all of them noticed ghastly killing intent in each other's eyes. Chapter 281 Change in the Situation. If it was said that they intended to kill Yang Yi in the beginning because they were afraid that he would expose what had occurred here today, then now, they wanted to kill Yang Yi because of his natural talent and potential. When it came to a genius that had comprehended the enlightened sword heart, since he wasn't a member of the Northern Territory, they felt that it was best if he died prematurely. Moreover, they just happened to possess the ability to make him die prematurely. Right when Huan Yan intended to attack, Yan Yi suddenly looked at them and said, "Out of consideration for your senior sister, I'll give you one last piece of advice. I'll allow all of you to leave safely if all of you apologize. What do you think?" Huan Yan was stunned, and then he roared loudly with laughter. He laughed for a short moment before he pointed his finger at Yan Yi and said, "Apologize to you? Then you'll let us leave safely? Little bastard, on what basis do you speak such words? Because you're an expert at the first heaven realm? Or perhaps because you've comprehended the enlightened sword heart? Not to mention that you're only at the first heaven realm, we wouldn't fear you even if you've attained the king realm." When he spoke up to here, Huan Yan slowly pointed his sword at Yan Yi and said, "Why don't you take your own life, and out of consideration for our senior sister, I'll leave your corpse intact, all right?" Ha ha! When they heard him, the other disciples behind Huan Yan instantly roared with laughter, and their gazes towards Yan Yi were filled with ridicule and disdain. Yan Yi shook his head, and then he turned to look at Lu Weiwei. He shrugged while his face was covered in a helpless expression. "See, they are determined to kill me. Since it's like that, then I can only kill them." As soon as he finished speaking, Yan Yi suddenly shouted loudly, "After watching the show for so long, it's about time that you show yourself, right?" All of them were stunned. "There's someone else here?" Right at this moment, Luo Shui, who'd originally left just now, had suddenly and mysteriously appeared before them. Luo Shui glanced at the disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect before his gaze descended onto Yan Yi, and he said, "Sometimes, humans are even worse than us dark beasts." The expressions of those disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect had instantly changed violently when they saw Luo Shui suddenly appear here. Huan Yan and the others didn't even hesitate in the slightest before they prepared to leave. However, they noticed to their astonishment that the dense horde of dark beasts had suddenly appeared at the ends of their fields of visions. Right at this moment, the sky suddenly dimmed down. When they raised their heads to look over, they saw that a dense expanse of flying dark beasts had covered the sky. They were surrounded once more. The faces of Huan Yan and the others turned even paler. Yan Yi glanced at Huan Yan and the others who had ghastly pale countenances before he said, "You're right. Humans really are worse than dark beasts on many occasions. He didn't intend to let us go at all?" Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei gazed at Yan Yi as she asked this question. "Correct," Luo Shui said. "All of you killed so many dark beasts from my dark beast empire and took their inner cores, so how could I possibly allow all of you to leave safely?" "Then why did you withdraw earlier?" asked Lu Weiwei in a low voice. Luo Shui grinned, and then he pointed a finger at Yan Yi and said, "I withdrew because he wanted to protect all of you, I'm utterly unable to kill all of you while he's here. So, I could only withdraw. Unfortunately, these disciples of your sect were unaware of this reason. Now I presume that he wouldn't protect them anymore. Right, Yang Yi? When he spoke these words, Luo Shui had looked towards Yang Yi. Yes, if he wasn't afraid of that mysterious dark beast that was by Yang Yi's side, how could he have possibly wasted his breath like this? All of them gazed at Yang Yi when they heard Luo Shui. If there was a pill for regret in this world, then they would definitely spare no cost to buy one. What was courting death like? What was being an idiot like? They were exactly that right now. They seemed to be aware that begging for mercy from Yang Yi was useless. So, in next to no time, they'd gazed at Lu Weiwei with gazes that were filled with a pleading expression. Lu Weiwei sighed lightly when she saw them gaze at her, and then she gazed at Yang Yi while her lips parted slightly. She wanted to say something but didn't say anything in the end. Yang Yi sighed lightly when he saw Lu Weiwei's troubled expression, and then he said, I understand that you're taking into consideration that they're from the same sect as you. However, are they really worthy of you pleading on their behalf? People that are ungrateful and narrow-minded like them are truly a waste of energy if they continue living in the world. So, I'm sorry. Yang Yi, we don't need a piece of trash from the Southern Territory like you to plead on our behalf. Right at this moment, Huan Yen gazed at Yang Yi with a savage expression and spoke in a slightly frenzied tone. Us disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect would rather die standing than kneel to preserve our lives. Even if we, members of the Northern Territory, are about to die, well, die with backbone and die a grand death. Disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect heed my command. Kill Yang Yi with all your might. When they heard Huan Yen, the dispirited eyes of those other disciples had instantly lit up, while hot blood surged within them. After that, they didn't hesitate to withdraw their swords and shoot swiftly towards Yang Yi as if they'd gone berserk. Right at this moment, Huan Yen, who was originally the first to charge towards Yang Yi, had shot backward explosively at a speed that was a few times swifter than before. As he shot backward explosively, a pair of wings that were formed from profound energy had suddenly appeared on his shoulders, and they flapped swiftly. In less than the time of a single breath, had already appeared over 30 m away. Such a scene had caused all the humans and dark beasts in the surroundings to be stunned. Even the other disciples who were charging towards Yang Yi had stopped on the spot, and then their minds went blank. Where's the backbone and hot blood that Huan Yen revealed just now? Didn't he say he would rather die standing than kneel to preserve his life? Didn't he say that even if he was to die, he would die with backbone and die a grand death? Why has he suddenly changed his tune? Luo Shui shook his head, and then his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After that, the sound of battle resounded from afar, and it continued for a very short period of time. In next to no time, Luo Shui had returned after the time for only a little over 10 breaths. Moreover, he was carrying a person in his hand, and that person was none other than Huan Yen, who'd fled just now. At this moment, Huan Yen wasn't dead yet, but he wasn't really far away from it. Because all 4 of his limbs had been severed by Luo Shui. Lu Weiwei's pupils constricted when she saw the horrifying state Huan Yen was in, and then she glanced at Luo Shui with slight astonishment. She was extremely clearly aware of the strength that Huan Yen possessed. Amongst the outer court disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect, Huan Yen was ranked at the 5th. However, he was actually easily defeated by this mysterious dark beast. Moreover, he didn't even have the chance to flee. Didn't they say that the profounders and dark beasts of the Southern Territory are extremely weak? If even this is considered as weak, then I'm afraid that besides the Central Territory, all the other territories don't have anyone that strong. At this moment, Yang Yi was slightly shocked as well. Since the beginning, even though he knew that Luo Shui's strength was very formidable, had never seen Luo Shui fight. So, he didn't know exactly how strong Luo Shui was. Yet now, he was sure that if he hadn't comprehended 5th level sword intent, then he would absolutely be unable to defeat Luo Shui. Because if he used his full strength, then he was confident in his ability to defeat this profounder from the Northern Territory called Huan Yen. but he knew that he was utterly unable to accomplish it with such ease as Luo Shui had. At this moment, Huan Yen had a ghastly pale countenance, and his eyes were filled with fear and horror as he gazed at Luo Shui. The short period of time that they'd fought earlier had allowed him to realize exactly how terrifying Luo Shui was. Why has such a terrifying dark beast appeared in a lousy place like the Southern Territory? Right at this moment, Huan Yen seemed to have thought of something, and then astonishment in his eyes grew deeper as he spoke in a hoarse voice. "You're a demon!" Crack! Huan Yen hadn't finished speaking when the clear and melodious sound of bones breaking resounded. Luo Shui threw Huan Yen's head that still had its eyes opened wide into the horde of dark beasts, and then he gazed at the 5 remaining disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect and said indifferently, "Kill them all!" As soon as he finished speaking, the countless dark beasts surged like tidewater towards those 5 disciples. "Senior sister, save us! Senior sister, please take the fact that we're from the same sect into consideration and rescue us junior brothers." Senior sister! Help me! Yan Yi, I won't let you off even if I become a ghost. Just you wait. I won't let you off. Oh! Brother Yang! Brother Yang! I was wrong! I was! Yan Yi, my Heavenly Sword sect won't let you off. My Heavenly Sword sect will definitely avenge us. For a time, all sorts of sorrowful howls and insults from those 5 disciples resounded. At this moment, Yan Yi was extremely furious in his heart. What the fuck? Am not the one killing all of you? It's the dark beasts of the Dark Beast Empire. But all of you aren't insulting them or looking for revenge from them, yet you seek it from me? All of you idiots really do deserve death. Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei was unable to continue watching in the end, and she flipped her palm. Right when she was about to attack, Yan Yi flashed swiftly to obstruct her path, and then he said, "You ought to be clearly aware that it wouldn't make a difference in the end. Moreover, it would even cause both you and your junior sister to lose your lives. Is it even worth it? It's not a matter of whether it is worth it or not." Lu Weiwei looked Yan Yi in the eye and said, "We're all from the same sect, so I can't watch indifferently as they died before me. Understand?" Yan Yi understood. These disciples were heartless, but this woman before him was unable to disregard her loyalties. At this moment, Yan Yi didn't know whether he should say she was stupid or someone that was full of character. Every single person had their own principles and standards which they acted on. Yan Yi knew that he shouldn't utilize his own principles and standards to judge the principles and standards of another. So, when he thought up to here, Yan Yi moved aside and said, "I won't stop you. Do what you think is right." Everyone had their own choices, and every single person had to bear the consequences of their choices. Even though he approved of her and sincerely hoped that she could survive, but he respected her choice. "Why aren't you stopping her?" Meanwhile, Kai Yan spoke anxiously. "Weiwei is single-minded sometimes, and she does a bunch of stupid things on a frequent basis. Since you've taken her to be your friend, then why aren't you stopping her? She's going to give her life away." As she spoke, Kai Yan hurriedly grabbed onto Lu Weiwei's hand as she was deeply afraid that Lu Weiwei would jump into battle and give her life away. Lu Weiwei glanced at Yang Yi, and then she stopped hesitating. She pulled her arm from Kai Yan's grasp, and then her figure flashed towards the disciples that were fighting bitterly against the horde of dark beasts. Chapter 282 Withstand a Strike of My Sword? However, right when she intended to charge into the horde of dark beasts, Luo Shui's figure had suddenly obstructed her path. Lu Weiwei's beautiful brows knit together slightly, and then she didn't hesitate at all to stab her sword towards Luo Shui. When her sword shot forward, it actually carried the sound of wind and thunder, and the terrifying energy contained within it caused Luo Shui's expression to change slightly. Third-level sword intent. Yes, Lu Weiwei hadn't held back, nor did she dare to do so. The strength of this mysterious shape-shifted dark beast before her was truly too terrifying. If she were to still hold back, then not to mention rescuing those disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect, even she herself would probably be annihilated in a short moment. So, she had utilized her full strength as soon as she attacked, and she utilized her sword intent without holding back at all. Luo Shui was slightly stunned at first when her sword intent enveloped him. Obviously, he hadn't expected that Lu Weiwei had actually comprehended sword intent, and it was even at the 3rd level. However, in next to no time, he recovered his calm once more. When Lu Weiwei's sword arrived around 1 m away from him, he suddenly clenched his fist before he smashed it towards that sword which carried terrifying sword intent. Bang! His fist hadn't even come into contact with the sword when the terrifying gale created by its movement had blasted Lu Weiwei flying. The winds on Lu Weiwei's shoulders flapped swiftly in midair, and her figure instantly slowed down before descending firmly on the ground. Lu Weiwei's pupils constricted when she looked at the sword in her hand, because the center of her Earth-rank sword had completely sunken down. This is an Earth-rank dark treasure. Exactly how terrifying is his strength? Is this really a dark beast from a place with scarce profound energy like the Southern Territory? A string of questions flashed swiftly and incessantly through Lu Weiwei's mind. At this moment, Yan Yi was extremely shocked as well. Such strength that's capable of blasting 3rd-level sword intent into dispersion with a single punch is truly extremely terrifying. After all, even Yuan Tong was unable to accomplish this. However, Luo Shui was able to accomplish it with ease. So, his strength was truly extremely terrifying. Condensed sword intent and extremely swift reaction. As expected of a genius from the Northern Territory. Luo Shui gazed at Lu Weiwei as he said, "Unfortunately, since all of you came to my Grand Myriad Mountains and killed the dark beasts of my Dark Beast Empire, then it's best for all of you to just leave your lives behind." Right at this moment, an extremely miserable and shrill cry suddenly resounded. Everyone looked over towards the source of the voice, and they saw that the disciples that were being surrounded by the dark beasts had vanished. In next to no time, they shot their gazes towards the ground, and they noticed that the ground was covered in blood and body pieces. A wisp of sorrow flashed in Lu Weiwei's eyes when she saw this. Because some of those disciples had grown up with her. Even though they didn't have a close relationship, they were still from the same sect. So, she was slightly unable to get over the emotions she felt after she watched them die before her. After those dark beasts finished dealing with those disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect, their gazes had locked onto Lu Weiwei and Kai Yan'an. Meanwhile, Yan Yi had moved over to stand before the two of them, and then he gazed at Luo Shui and said, "Let's let the matter rest, all right?" Luo Shui gazed at Yan Yi for a short while before he shook his head and said, "The dark beasts of my Dark Beast Empire can't die for nothing. So, they must die." Yan Yi's brows raised and he said, "So, there's no room for discussion, huh?" "Yes." Luo Shui spoke indifferently. Yan Yi took a step forward, and then he said, "You ought to be clearly aware that numbers are useless against me when it's against dark beasts. In other words, the two of us have to fight here." Luo Shui frowned lightly, and then he said, "According to my knowledge, you, Yan Yi, aren't a person that draws his sword to defend the weak or wronged. So I'm very curious about why you would help these two people from the Northern Territory. You seem to have only been acquainted with them for a few hours, right? What he said is exactly what I want to ask." Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei glanced at Yan Yi while a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in her eyes. She said, "I don't know if you're really that Yan Yi from the Southern Territory who has comprehended the enlightened sword heart, but I know that you're utterly not a match for him. I'm able to sense that he wouldn't make a move against you if you intend to leave. However, you've chosen to stay behind. I'm very curious about why you're acting in this way." Yan Yi chuckled, and then he replied with a question. "I'm very curious as well. Why did you choose to rescue me earlier? After all, I'm only at the First Heaven Realm, and am even a profounder from the Southern Territory." Lu Weiwei was stunned, and then she shook her head and said, "I didn't think too much about it. I just felt that it was within my ability, so I did that." "It was within your ability?" Yan Yi nodded, and then he smiled and said, "I'm doing something within my ability right now as well." Lu Weiwei glanced at Luo Shui, and then she said in a low voice, "He's very strong. Even if you're that Yang Yi who has attained the enlightened sword heart, you're absolutely not a match for him now." Meanwhile, Luo Shui said, "She's very right. Yang Yi, I know that you can surmount realms of cultivation to do battle, and you even possess stronger trump cards. However, I have to tell you that even if you utilize that Dao artifact once more, you who hasn't advanced into the King realm would definitely lose. Out of consideration for it, it'll allow you to leave, and we can have a fair fight once you advance into the King realm in the future." "Perhaps you're right." Yang Yi smiled, and then he said with a serious expression, "But I have very few friends, and I just found one with great difficulty. How could I just watch as she dies? So, I intend to give it a try." "A friend?" Luo Shui shook his head and smiled, and then he pointed at Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan as he said, "Yang Yi, you seem to have taken all of this for granted. Just ask them, have they taken you to be their friend? Even if they say that they have, would you believe it? All of this is one-sided right now, understand?" "Perhaps," Yang Yi said with a smile on his face, "but I still intend to act in this way." "Give me a reason," said Luo Shui in a low voice. "A reason?" Yang Yi shook his head and said, "At many times, there's no need for a reason when we do something, right? Besides that, whether they've taken me to be a friend of theirs isn't important to me. What's important is that I'm willing to take them as my friends, and that's enough for me. At the very least, they were my friends earlier, and they are my friends right now. As for the future, that's something for the future." Both of them went silent when they heard Yang Yi. Had they taken Yang Yi to be their friend? The answer was no. As for the reason, there were truly too many reasons. For example, they just met Yang Yi. They were members of the Northern Territory while Yang Yi was from the Southern Territory. In short, as far as they were concerned, friendship was something that was gradually formed through a period of getting along with each other and possessing similar interests and goals. However, Yang Yi had taken them to be his friends because of something they'd done without giving it any thought. Moreover, he was even willing to risk his life to help them. This caused both of them to be puzzled and bewildered. Luo Shui gazed at Yang Yi for a short while before he said, "You don't care about the thoughts of the world and only act according to your heart. Now I slightly understand why you were able to comprehend 4th level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart. Fine, out of consideration for it, I'll let the two of them go if you're able to withstand a punch of mine without moving backward. What do you think? Of course, if you're unable to withstand it, then you can die along with the two of them. I'll do it." Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei suddenly walked over to stand by Yang Yi's side, and she glanced at Yang Yi before she said, "Third rank sect of the Northern Territory, the Heavenly Sword Sect's Lu Weiwei." Yang Yi was stunned, and then he smiled and said, "I don't have many friends. You'll be one from today onward." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at Luo Shui before he said, "I know that you're very strong, and I know that you weren't bragging just now. However, why would I, Yang Yi, need someone to make concessions for me? Withstand a punch of yours without moving backward? How about we change the rules?" "What do you mean?" said Luo Shui in a low voice. "Ha ha!" Yang Yi roared with laughter, and then he said, "If you're able to withstand a strike of my sword without moving backward, then you can do as you please with the three of us. What do you think about that?" Luo Shui's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he said in a low voice, "Yang Yi, could it be that you think that you're extremely formidable because you seized the first position on the Ascension rankings and defeated Yuan Tong? I admit that if you attained the King realm, then the chances of victory in a battle between the two of us would be 70:30. However, you're only at the first heaven realm, so as I said before, I'll still be able to kill you even if you utilize that Dao artifact. Why don't we give it a try then?" said Yang Yi. "As you wish." Luo Shui spoke in a low voice, and then he suddenly stomped the ground with his right foot. Suddenly, the entire ground suddenly trembled violently like it was an earthquake. On the other hand, Luo Shui himself had instantly shot forward towards Yang Yi like a bolt of lightning. His speed was so swift that both Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan were unable to see his figure clearly. At the instant that Luo Shui had moved, Yang Yi had flipped his palm, and then a low-grade earth-rank sword had appeared in his hand. After that, the profound energy within his dantian started circulating madly. In an instant, all the profound energy within his dantian had surged violently into his sword. Moreover, his fourth-level sword intent had even instantly sprayed out and wrapped around his sword. Once this was done, he added on the physical strength that he possessed before he slashed his sword down forcefully towards Luo Shui. When facing this mysterious shape-shifted dark beast, Yang Yi really didn't dare be careless at all. However, he still didn't utilize the nether ghost flames and fifth-level sword intent. Yang Yi was confident that if he utilized any one of them, then blasting Luo Shui back would definitely be an extremely easy task. However, after a moment of hesitation, had chosen not to utilize them in the end. They were his greatest trump cards right now. If he utilized them now, then they wouldn't be trump cards anymore. Especially the nether ghost flames, he would absolutely not utilize it unless he was confident in his ability to kill his opponent. Because once he utilized it, it was very likely that it would bring down calamity upon him. Under the astounded gazes of the two women, Yang Yi's sword and Luo Shui's fist collided forcefully with each other. Bang! A world-shaking bang instantly resounded. At the same time, the ground where both of them stood had instantly collapsed. Chapter 283 Nether Energy of Death. After that, Yan Yi and Luo Shui shot backward explosively in opposite directions, and it wasn't long before they stopped moving. At this moment, Yan Yi had an extremely solemn expression. Because head moved 18 back while Luo Shui had moved 15 back. Moreover, only half of the sword in his hand remained right now. Yes, at the moment his sword collided with Luo Shui's fist, the sword in his hand had been instantly blasted into half by the terrifying force that Luo Shui's fist carried. It was an earth-rank sword. However, such a sword had been blasted into half just like that. This caused Yang Yi to have no choice but to re-evaluate Luo Shui's strength. At this moment, Luo Shui's expression was slightly solemn as well. Because he noticed that he seemed to have underestimated Yang Yi. Even though had merely utilized less than 60% of his strength just now, that 60% of strength wasn't something that a profounder at the first heaven realm could resist. However, the facts of the situation showed that Yang Yi hadn't just resisted his strength, Yang Yi had even blasted him backward. This caused him to be slightly shocked. Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan were even more shocked than Luo Shui was. They didn't know how strong Luo Shui was, but they knew how strong Huan Yan was. Huan Yan was slightly weaker than Lu Weiwei, but he was only able to survive for a few breaths of time in front of Luo Shui. However, Yang Yi was able to fight Luo Shui equally. In other words, Yang Yi's strength far surpassed them? Didn't they say that the profounders of the Southern Territory are extremely weak? Didn't they say that the profounders of the Southern Territory can't resist a single blow? At this moment, both Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan wanted to drag over the person who said all of this and chop that person into pieces. Are these two people before us weak? If they are considered to be weak, then all the geniuses of the Northern Territory are probably weaklings. Of course, the true source of their shock was the fourth-level sword intent that Yang Yi utilized just now. Sword intent wasn't just rare in the Southern Territory, it was extremely rare in the Northern Territory and the other territories. Yet Yang Yi had attained the fourth level of sword intent before the age of 20. When it comes to such natural talent, then in the entire Heavenly Sword sect, only senior brother Yuan Guixio can compare to him. Of course, the precondition to this was that Yang Yi hadn't attained the enlightened sword heart. Otherwise, not to mention the Heavenly Sword sect, it would be impossible to find someone who could compare to Yang Yi even in the Immortal Sword sect, which was a fifth-rank sect. Fourth-level sword intent, gold element profound energy, and physical strength that's comparable to a king realm dark beast of my dark beast empire. Luo Shui gazed at Yang Yi as he spoke in a deep voice. Needless to say, your strength is really not bad. If you attain the king realm, then there'll probably be very few in the Southern Territory who can be a match for you. Yang Yi shook his head and said, "There are numerous monstrous geniuses in the world. Even if we disregard everyone else, I wouldn't be confident in my ability to defeat you even if I attained the King Realm." He was telling the truth. Because Luo Shui's strength really was extremely strong. It was even to the extent that it was much stronger than Yuan Tong. Just as Luo Shui had said, he would probably be unable to kill Luo Shui even if he utilized the Dao artifact. This was a feeling he had. Luo Shui gazed at Yan Yi for a short moment, and a wisp of surprise immediately flashed through his eyes when he saw Yan Yi's rosy face remain completely calm and composed, and then he said, "You've truly surprised me. Well, meet at the ancient battlefield." As soon as he finished speaking, Luo Shui glanced deeply at Yan Yi before he led the horde of dark beasts along with him and vanished from their fields of vision. Lu Weiwei was just about to say something when she saw Luo Shui leave. However, right at this moment, a mouthful of blood suddenly sprayed from Yan Yi's mouth, and then his face swiftly turned ghastly pale. Both the two women were shocked, and then Lu Weiwei said, "You're injured?" "I'm fine." Yan Yi shook his head, and then he gazed towards the direction Luo Shui had left towards while his expression turned slightly more solemn. At the instant that his sword collided with Luo Shui's fist just now, besides the fact that his sword had snapped, had also sensed a strand of mysterious force suddenly travel through his sword and enter his body. After the mysterious energy entered his body, it started to rage throughout his body and ceaselessly damaged the meridians within his body. Moreover, to his astonishment, the golden profound energy within his dantian was actually unable to suppress this mysterious energy. Fortunately, when that energy started to damage his dantian, the tiny vortex within his body had finally acted. A strand of suction force had suddenly surged out from within the tiny vortex. Under the effects of this suction force, the mysterious energy had been instantly absorbed into the tiny vortex, and then it transformed into nothingness. Even though the tiny vortex had dealt with the mysterious energy, Yang Yi was still heavily injured right now because numerous meridians within his body had been damaged. That was the reason why Head spat out a mouthful of blood just now. The reason Head acted as if he was fine in front of Luo Shui was that Head sensed Luo Shui's killing intent. Yes, his intuition told him that if he revealed even the slightest sign of being injured, then Luo Shui would definitely attack him with the intent to kill. Without the little fellow by his side, he didn't have any chance of survival while he faced Luo Shui and the countless dark beasts in the surroundings. So, he had no choice but to endure the heartrending pain within him just now. Fortunately, the pain he experienced from having his meridians damaged was extremely inferior when compared to the pain that the nether ghost flame had caused him that day. It was exactly because of this that he was able to avoid exposing the injuries Head suffered to Luo Shui. Of course, Yang Yi was unable to figure out why Luo Shui would arouse killing intent towards him. Was it because of the little fellow? Or was it because of something else? On the other side, Luo Shui had an extremely solemn expression as he gazed at the deep mark of a sword on his fist. The mark that was over a few inches long had been inflicted by Yang Yi just now. Had utilized numerous methods to eliminate this mark. However, they were all useless. Because this mark contained sharp 4th-level sword intent. Of course, the thing he attached the most importance to was the fact that Yan Yi was actually able to break through his defenses. If Yan Yi had attained the King Realm and broken through his defenses, then he wouldn't feel surprised by it. However, Yan Yi was merely at the 1st Heaven Realm now. Even if Yan Yi possessed 4th-level sword intent, it was impossible to break through his defenses while merely at the 1st Heaven Realm. But Yang Yi had accomplished such a feat. This was the reason why Head aroused killing intent towards Yang Yi. Because Yang Yi's strength and potential had already aroused fear in him. Moreover, Yang Yi just happened to be a human who was heading to the ancient battlefield. In other words, it was very likely that Yang Yi would be heading to the ancient battlefield to fight for karmic luck for the humans. If Yang Yi were to seize karmic luck for the humans, then it would definitely be bad news for the Dark Beast Empire. So, for the sake of preventing such great trouble from descending onto the Dark Beast Empire in the future, he was prepared to kill Yang Yi. However, to his surprise, Yang Yi remained completely unaffected after his nether energy of death had entered Yang Yi's body. This caused him to instantly abandon his intentions to attack Yang Yi. What was the nether energy of death? It was like Yang Yi's nether ghost flame, and it was a treasure of the heavens and the earth. However, unlike Yang Yi's nether ghost flame, Luo Shui's nether energy of death wasn't created from the energy of the heavens and the earth, and it was intentionally created by profounders. Such energy of death was only be formed when someone had just perished, and it had to be preserved with a secret technique. After that, the energy of death could only be converted into a part of one's own strength after it was refined innumerable times. Of course, the energy of death within a single person was insufficient. In order to form the type of nether energy of death that Luo Shui possessed, the energy of death from at least 1,000,000 people was required. Once this energy of death came into contact with a living being, it would enter the living being's body and destroy the vitality within the body. However, this sort of energy of death wasn't terrifying because it could destroy the vitality within the body. It was terrifying because it was impossible to destroy. Even the profound energy of the 5 elements was unable to destroy such energy of death. In the past, Luo Shui had relied on this energy of death to kill a human expert at the spirit realm. Even a spirit realm expert was unable to resist the energy of death, but it was utterly useless against Yang Yi. So, Luo Shui was deeply bewildered by this. "Are you all right?" Lu Weiwei gazed at Yang Yi, who sat cross-legged on the ground, as she asked in a light voice. Right when Yang Yi was about to say something, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then a strand of cold light shot swiftly like a bolt of lightning towards Yang Yi's throat. This sudden and unexpected change in the situation caused the expressions of Lu Weiwei and Kai Yan to change. However, they were powerless to lend a hand at this moment because the appearance of that black shadow was too sudden and the black shadow's attack was too swift. It was swift to the point they were utterly unable to react before it had arrived in front of Yang Yi's throat. As he gazed at Yang Yi, who was right before him, Ling Jun couldn't help but reveal a smile. Had just arrived here, yet had noticed to his pleasant surprise that Yang Yi was actually heavily injured. Why was Yang Yi heavily injured? He hadn't thought about this problem, nor did he need to think about it. In any case, his objective was to kill Yang Yi. So, this moment was the perfect opportunity. Out of consideration for the terrifying physical defense that Yang Yi possessed, he hadn't held back this time, and had utilized his full strength. This time, he was confident. So long as his dagger came into contact with Yang Yi's throat, then it just had to slit open a small cut open on Yang Yi's throat, and then Yang Yi would definitely perish. Because head smeared an extraordinary poison that was a mixture of over 1,000 poisons onto the dagger. Not to mention a profounder at the first heaven realm, even a profounder at the spirit realm would definitely die without the antidote. Yet now, his dagger was less than half an inch away from Yang Yi's throat. So, Yang Yi was unable to evade it even if he executed a heaven rank movement technique. In other words, Yang Yi was dead. However, right at this moment, a layer of violet light that was thin as a cicada's wing had suddenly appeared on Yang Yi's throat. The violet light was like skin that stuck tightly onto the skin on Yang Yi's throat. Right at this moment, Ling Jun's dagger came into contact with Yang Yi's throat. Right, it should be the layer of violet light instead. Clang! A clear and melodious clang resounded, and then Ling Jun was stunned. Because he noticed that it felt as if head struck his dagger against dark iron, and the force from the collision shook his arm to the point it felt numb. When he focused his gaze towards the point of collision, he finally noticed that an extremely thin layer of violet light had suddenly appeared on Yang Yi's throat. During this instant that he was dazed, a little violet-colored fellow had suddenly appeared in front of him. The little violet-colored fellow gazed at him, blinked, and then it raised its claw. Chapter 284 Separating the Soul. When he saw this little fellow that made a sudden appearance here raise its claw, a feeling of danger suddenly arose in Ling Jun's heart, and he didn't hesitate at all to flash backward explosively. Right at the instant that head just retreated, a strand of violet light had mysteriously appeared where he stood just now. Ling Jun felt a wave of fear when he saw the violet arc of light, and it was even to the extent that some cold sweat had appeared on his forehead. Moreover, he felt fortunate in his heart. Luckily, I retreated swiftly, otherwise, I would have definitely been struck by it. Right at this moment, that arc of violet light had suddenly vanished on the spot, and it directly appeared in front of Ling Jun in the next moment. Ling Jun was astounded, and he didn't hesitate to utilize his movement technique to shoot backward explosively. Right at the instant that head shot backward, 3 arcs of violet light appeared out of thin air behind him. It was like Ling Jun himself had moved to collide with those 3 arcs of violet light, and he let out a shrill cry while his body was blasted flying. How could Yang Yi let such a great opportunity slip by? Head moved forward when Ling Jun retreated explosively for the second time, and then he drew his sword and slashed it towards Ling Jun, who was shooting explosively towards him right now. Ling Jun was already heavily injured from being blasted by those 3 arcs of violet light. However, he was still alive. After all, he was a King Realm expert. Ling Jun's pupils constricted violently when he saw Yang Yi's sword slash down towards him. How could he dare go head-on against Yang Yi at this moment? So, he immediately forcefully endured the roiling profound energy in his body and the injuries on his back as he executed his movement technique once more, and he flashed towards the side. However, right at this moment, 3 strands of violet light had mysteriously appeared on his right, and just like before, it seemed like had taken the initiative to collide with them. When he sensed the violet light that had appeared abruptly on his right, Ling Jun was terrified this time. Because he noticed that the movement technique which he took pride in and knew was able to allow him to flee from even a spirit realm expert seemed to be useless this time. Bang! Along with an explosion, Ling Jun was blasted in the opposite direction, and he flew for around 15 m before his figure smashed to the ground. However, he was still alive. But he was in an extremely miserable state. His black clothes had transformed into ash while his entire body was mangled. If his head wasn't still attached to his body, there would probably be no one capable of recognizing that this was the body of a man. After falling to the ground for less than 2 breaths of time, Ling Jun suddenly leaped up into the air like a leopard that was hunting its prey, and then he shot explosively towards the distance, and even swiftly concealed himself. After Head concealed himself, Ling Jun instantly heaved a sigh of relief, and he felt fortunate that Head once paid a huge price to purchase a high-grade healing talisman. If it wasn't for that talisman, then he would have definitely died this time. Yes, when he was struck by the violet light for the second time, Ling Jun hadn't hesitated to slap that high-grade healing talisman onto his body, and it was exactly this talisman that had preserved his life. Moreover, it even allowed him to have some strength to flee. Now, there was only a single thought in his mind, and that was to flee with all his might. He wanted to run from the Grand Myriad Mountains and never try to assassinate Yang Yi again. Head found out from the information the League of Doom had gathered on Yang Yi that Yang Yi possessed a mysterious king-rank dark beast. However, he didn't take it seriously at that time because he was very confident in his movement technique. In his opinion, not to mention a king-rank dark beast, even a spirit-rank dark beast would be helpless against him if he was determined to flee. However, this incident told him that he was wrong. That mysterious little fellow was 10 times more terrifying than any spirit realm dark beast. Because the movement technique he took pride in was utterly useless before that mysterious little fellow. Moreover, that mysterious king-rank dark beast's attacks were even more mysterious and terrifying than his movement technique. When he thought about those strange attacks, Ling Jun's entire body couldn't help but shudder. At this moment, Head decided to give up on assassinating Yang Yi. He still had a chance to kill Yang Yi if that mysterious little fellow wasn't present, but he had no chance at all with the mysterious little fellow present by Yang Yi's side. Not to mention a chance to kill Yang Yi, the slightest mistake might even lead to his death. When he thought up to here, Ling Jun sped up once more. However, right at this moment, that mysterious king-rank dark beast had suddenly and shockingly appeared in front of him. After that, The mysterious little fellow blinked before it raised its little claw. Ling Jun's eyes opened wide when he saw this, and they were filled with shock. He was just about to turn around and flee. However, the violet mink's claw had descended at the exact same instant that this thought had appeared in Ling Jun's mind. Subsequently, a square-shaped violet-colored barrier of light had appeared around Ling Jun. Ling Jun didn't hesitate at all to strike his dagger against the barrier of light. Bang! The violet barrier of light didn't shake at all while Ling Jun's arm felt numb instead. After that, his figure was blasted flying, but he didn't fly far because head collided with the barrier of light behind him. Ling Jun was filled with despair as he gazed at the thin barrier of light around him. While Ling Jun was filled with despair, Kai Yan Yan and Lu Weiwei were shocked. Since Ling Jun appeared, until the moment the little fellow appeared, and then the battle came to an end right now, both of them had been completely shocked. It was naturally that little fellow who had shocked them. The mysterious violet light and the shocking barrier of light created by the little fellow made them feel shock and deep fear at the same time. Because this strange method of attack was truly too mysterious, and it was mysterious to the point of being impossible to evade. The movement technique possessed by that black figure had already shocked them and caused fear to arise in their hearts, but it was too much more inferior when compared to the violet light. What sort of dark beast is that little fellow? Their minds were filled with questions right now because they weren't able to determine the little fellow's origins even with the knowledge and experience that they possessed. After it trapped Ling Jun, the violet mink flicked in midair and arrived in front of Yang Yi. After that, it rubbed its head against Yang Yi's face in an intimate manner. Yang Yi smiled as he gazed at the little fellow, and a wisp of a gentle expression flashed in his eyes. He stretched out his hand to rub the little fellow's head as he said, "Little fellow, long time no see, huh?" The violet mink blinked before it rubbed its head against Yang Yi's palm. "Are you at the spirit rank now?" asked Yang Yi in a low voice. The violet mink shook its head, and then it started gesturing with its little claws. After a period of difficult communication, Yang Yi finally found out that the little fellow was still a king-rank dark beast. However, it was no ordinary king-rank dark beast, because the little fellow was at the peak of the king rank. Just like the Earth Bear King from before, the violet mink was already half a step into the spirit rank. This caused Yang Yi to feel extremely delighted because once the little fellow stepped foot into the spirit rank, then he could subdue shape-shifted dark beasts at the spirit rank to fight on his behalf. Just think about it, if a large group of shape-shifted dark beasts at the spirit rank appeared with a wave of his hand one more. Yang Yi finally went over to Ling Jun after he played with the little fellow for a while. He gazed at Ling Jun who was trapped behind the violet barriers of light as he chuckled lightly and said, "So you're still alive? I thought you would have taken your own life. Since you didn't, then it means you don't want to die. You can live if you want. You just have to answer a few questions of mine. What do you think?" Ling Jun gazed coldly at Yang Yi and remained silent. Yang Yi restrained his smile and said, "I don't like to waste my breath. So, I'll count to 3. If you don't answer me after I count to 3, then you have to die even if you don't want to. 1. Ling Jun's eyelids twitched but he still didn't speak. 2. Ling Jun's face fell but he still remained silent because he knew what Yang Yi wanted to ask, and he couldn't answer such a question. Because once he answered Yang Yi, then it meant that he would have to face the endless pursuit of the League. The League of Doom permitted its assassins to fail, but they were prohibited from betrayed. Once they betrayed the League, then the League wouldn't let them go even if they fled to the ends of the world. However, if he didn't answer then he would die right now. As he gazed at Ling Jun who remained silent, Yang Yi said indifferently, "Little fellow, kill him!" When it heard Yang Yi, the violet mink instantly raised its claw, and then the violet mink didn't hesitate to wave it lightly. After that, a strand of violet light directly appeared behind the barrier of light, and it blasted down towards Ling Jun who was already heavily injured. Ling Jun was shocked in his heart. He didn't want to die right now, so he immediately spoke without thinking. "Wait!" Yang Yi was about to speak when he heard this, but it was already too late because the violet light had struck Ling Jun. Bang! Ling Jun was blasted flying once more, and then he collided forcefully with the barrier of light behind him and was bounced forward again. After that, he lay on the ground without moving at all, and his fate was unknown. The violet mink glanced at Yan Yi, and then it revealed an innocent expression. It seemed to be saying that Ling Jun was too late. Yan Yi shook his head with a helpless expression, and then he asked the little fellow to open up the barrier of light. He walked over and checked Ling Jun before he said, "Luckily, he's still alive." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at the violet mink and said, "Little fellow, do you have any method to control him?" "Right, the type that will make him have to obey me once he recuperates." The violet mink blinked, and then rubbed its chin with its little claw. It pondered deeply for a long time before its eyes lit up, and then it waved its little claw at Ling Jun. In an instant, Ling Jun's brows had knit together tightly, and his face was covered in an expression of pain. In next to no time, and under the astounded gazes of Yan Yi and the two women, a strand of mysterious black gas had slowly floated out from Ling Jun's body, and then it floated in front of Yan Yi. Separation of the soul! When she witnessed this scene, Lu Weiwei gazed at the little fellow and suddenly cried out involuntarily. "You're actually able to separate the soul of a person. This? How could this be possible? How could this be possible? Separation of the soul?" Yang Yi frowned. Could it be that this strand of black gas is that assassin's soul? Chapter 285 The Demon Territory. At this moment, Lu Weiwei was extremely shocked, and it should be said that she was shocked to the extreme. It was common knowledge that the soul of a person consisted of many different parts. However, even though this was common knowledge, it was utterly impossible for one to see and take control of one's own soul unless one possessed a secret technique, or some sort of special technique. The soul was a slightly ethereal and unreal thing. Because it really existed in the body, yet it was impossible to sense or control. Even if it belonged to you. Besides the residents of the Nether Territory, there was only one sort of existence capable of controlling their own souls and utilizing the soul to execute attacks, and it was extraordinary experts at the Monarch realm. The reason the members of the Nether Territory were capable of accomplishing it was because they weren't people at all, and they were souls, or what people called ghosts. On the other hand, Monarch realm experts possessed extraordinary cultivations themselves, and they had attained an inconceivable height. So, not to mention their own souls, they were even able to observe their destiny slightly. To put it simply, only Monarch realm experts, and those ghosts of the Nether Territory were able to directly affect the soul of another. However, this little fellow before them wasn't from the Nether Territory, nor was it a Monarch-ranked dark beast. However, it was able to forcefully separate the soul of a person. What sort of monstrous genius is this? Even though he was slightly shocked by the little fellow's ability to separate the soul of the black-robed assassin, he wasn't as shocked as Lu Weiwei was. Because Qin Xie had done so in the past. Even though he guessed that the strand of the soul which Qin Xie gave him was fake, it made him feel that while the separation of the soul was slightly mysterious, it wasn't especially rare. "Hell, obey me in the future with this in my possession?" asked Yang Yi while he gazed at the black gas that was enveloped by violet light. The violet mink nodded. "Why?" Yang Yi wasn't ashamed to constantly ask questions in order to broaden his knowledge. The violet mink blinked, and it gazed at Yang Yi while being at a loss for how to explain it. Obviously, it was very difficult for it to explain the answer to Yang Yi's question. "Because with this strand of the soul in your possession, you only need a single thought to make living worse than death for this assassin." Meanwhile, Lu Weiwei suddenly said, "A person has 3 spiritual and 6 physical souls, and they are one." When she spoke up to hear, Lu Weiwei glanced at the violet mink with a complicated expression on her face, and then she continued. "However, a spiritual soul of his was extracted by force. In other words, you can rely on this spiritual soul to affect the other 2 spiritual souls and 6 physical souls. Just a single thought of yours would be sufficient to make living worse than death to him." Even an Exalt Realm expert would probably be unable to endure that sort of pain that comes from the depths of the soul. It's that formidable? Yan Ye's eyes lit up, and then he said, "Let me try." When he spoke up to hear, he issued a command in his heart, and a strand of sword intent smashed directly onto the strand of black gas. Right at this moment, Ling Jun, who had fallen unconscious, had suddenly let out an extremely miserable and shrill cry. After that, his body twitched as if had been electrocuted. Moreover, the features on his face had instantly warped. It simply seemed as if he was experiencing unimaginable pain. Yan Yi was shocked by Ling Jun's reaction. But in next to no time, he started laughing. Because from now onward, he had an extraordinary lackey at the King Realm, and it was even an assassin. A wisp of pity flashed in Lu Weiwei's eyes as she gazed at Ling Jun, who was writhing in pain on the ground. However, she didn't say anything because she was aware that if Yan Yi hadn't had the assistance of that little fellow, then he would probably have perished by now. Moreover, if Yan Yi perished, then the assassin would probably not let Kai Yan and her go. She was naturally not afraid of a head-on collision with the assassin. However, when she thought about that assassin's shocking movement technique, she couldn't help but shudder with fear. After a moment of delight, Yan Yi turned to look at the little fellow before he spoke with slight displeasure. "Little fellow, since you possess such an ability, then why didn't you tell me in the past?" Yes, if the little fellow told him about it sooner, then he could possess numerous extraordinary experts to fight for him. Even if he couldn't subdue numerous extraordinary experts, just torturing them to death in such a way was perfect. For example, the Flower Palace's Feng. The little fellow instantly revealed the wronged expression when it heard Yan Yi, and then it started waving its little claws about. Before long, Yan Yi understood that the little fellow was saying that it couldn't accomplish this in the past, and the reason it could now was because its strength had improved. Right at this moment, Lu Weiwei suddenly asked, "Yan Yi, is it from the demon territory?" "The demon territory?" Yan Yi frowned, and then he said, "What's that? You don't know the demon territory?" Kai Yan opened her eyes wide as she gazed at Yan Yi, and it was like she was looking at an idiot. Lu Weiwei was slightly stunned as well. Obviously, she hadn't expected that Yan Yi didn't even know of the demon territory. Yan Yi was slightly embarrassed from being looked at in such a manner by them, and he immediately said, "Please do tell." When she noticed that Yan Yi didn't seem to be acting, Lu Weiwei glanced at him with a strange gaze before she said in her heart, "Exactly how isolated is the Southern Territory?" Lu Weiwei stopped thinking about this and said, "Since Profounder Continent was split apart by those two extraordinary experts, it was divided into numerous territories, and one of them is called the Demon Territory. There are no humans there, and only demon beasts reside there." "Right, they are what you residents of the Southern Territory call dark beasts. Of course, no matter if it's strength, bloodline, or type, the dark beasts of the Grand Myriad Mountains are utterly unable to compare to the demon beasts that reside there. After all, the 4 great divine beasts of the ancient times exist within the demon territory." Yan Yi was shocked in his heart when he heard this. The 4 great divine beasts of the ancient times. In other words, the legendary dragon race exists in the demon territory? Moreover, the little fellow is from such a place? Lu Weiwei glanced once more at the violet mink with a complicated expression, and then she said, "Its method of attack is truly too mysterious. I think that there aren't any dark beasts and humans in the world that aren't afraid of it. Logically speaking, such a type of demon beast should be extremely famous in the demon territory. However, there's no information about it within the information of the demon territory which my heavenly sword sect possesses. This is exactly why I'm bewildered." Yan Yi turned to look at the violet mink, and then he stretched out his hand to rub its little head before he said, "Little fellow, are you from the demon territory?" The violet mink blinked, and then its eyeballs started to spin. When he saw this, Yan Yi rubbed the little fellow's head with a helpless expression on his face, and then he said, "Stop trying to avoid it, and answer me." The violet mink fell silent for a short while before it nodded. After that, it seemed to have thought of something, and it flashed onto Yan Ye's shoulder and rubbed its head against Yan Ye's face. When she saw the violet mink nod, Lu Weiwei gazed at Yang Yi and sighed. She hesitated for a moment before she said, "Even though I don't know why it's staying by your side, what I want to tell you is that the demon territory is very hostile towards the entire human race. In other words, if those demon beasts of the demon territory find out that it's staying by your side, then you'll probably be in great trouble." "Great trouble?" Yang Yi roared with laughter, and then he said, "The trouble I face has never been little, so what if I have a little more? In any case, so long as the little fellow isn't willing to leave, then no one can separate us, regardless of whether it's a human or demon beast. If anyone thinks of doing that, then it'll make him regret being born." When it heard Yang Yi, a strand of violet light suddenly flashed in the violet mink's eyes, and then it blinked at Yang Yi before it rubbed its little head against Yang Yi's face. "Stop bragging." Meanwhile, Kai Yan said, "You don't know how terrifying those fellows from the demon territory are. If you know how formidable they are, then you wouldn't say that." Yang Yi smiled, and then he said, "Even if they are formidable, are they as formidable as my little fellow?" Kai Yan was instantly speechless. She had personally witnessed the ability of this little fellow. In this world, perhaps only the legendary divine beast, Phoenix, could match this little fellow's speed. On the other hand, any other demon beast or human could only suffer a beating when facing this little fellow. Yang Yi suddenly asked, "By the way, will the members of the demon territory be coming to the ancient battlefield?" "Of course they will," Lu Weiwei said. "The ancient battlefield is related to karmic luck, so the demon territory will naturally dispatch some of its geniuses." When she spoke up to hear, Lu Weiwei seemed to have thought of something. She glanced at Yang Yi and the violet mink before she sighed and said, "It's best that you ask it to hide itself once you arrive at the ancient battlefield. Otherwise, if those demon beasts from the demon territory find out that it's from the demon territory as well, both of you will be in great trouble." Yang Yi grinned, and then he gazed at the little fellow and said, "Are you afraid?" The little fellow shook its head in a very resolute manner. What a joke! It wasn't afraid of any demon beast in the world. Yang Yi smiled and said, "I'm not afraid as well." Lu Weiwei sighed. She hesitated for a moment before she said, "Brother Yang, your natural talent and potential is truly being buried in the Southern Territory. I wonder if Brother Yang is interested in heading to the other territories? You want me to head to the Northern Territory and join the Heavenly Sword sect?" asked Yang Yi. Lu Weiwei nodded and said, "If Brother Yang joins the Heavenly Sword sect, I guarantee that Brother Yang will immediately ascend to the ranks of inner court disciples. Moreover, the sect will foster Brother Yang with all its might. No matter if it's medicinal pills, cultivation techniques, or combat techniques, my Heavenly Sword sect will give Brother Yang the best." "Forget it," Yang Yi refused and said, "I think that all these sources of reliance can't be relied on. The most important factor is still one's own strength because it's the true foundation of everything." Of course, there was something else that Yang Yi hadn't said, and it was that he truly felt extreme contempt towards the character of those disciples from the Heavenly Sword sect, and he felt that the higher-ups of the Heavenly Sword sect weren't any different. When she heard Yang Yi's refusal, Lu Weiwei still wanted to say something. However, Yang Yi waved his hand, and then he tossed 2 high-grade healing talismans and 2 high-grade strider talismans to the 2 of them before he said, "It's really not safe to stay in the Grand Myriad Mountains any longer. Quickly head over to the ancient battlefield." After she caught those 4 talismans in her hands, Lu Weiwei was stunned. The Northern Territory naturally had talismans as well, and it wasn't really valuable to her. However, it was different when the talismans were of the high grade. Even she found it very difficult to obtain high-grade talismans. However, Yang Yi had casually tossed 4 high-grade talismans to them. Chapter 286 Dispelling the Poison. After she glanced at the 4 talismans in her hand with a complicated expression, Lu Weiwei sighed and said, "Brother Yang, will you really not give it any more consideration?" She really didn't want to give up. Because if Yang Yi joined the Heavenly Sword sect with the potential and natural talent he possessed, then it would be good for both the sect and Yang Yi. Yang Yi shook his head and refused once more. If Head rescued his mother, then perhaps he would take his mother to another territory with him. However, his mother was still confined in the Flower Palace, so he would absolutely not head to another territory. A wisp of disappointment flashed through her eyes when she saw Yang Yi refuse once more, and then she said, "No matter what, I still hope that Brother Yang can reconsider. If Brother Yang comes around in the future and is willing to head to the Northern Territory, then you can come looking for me at the ancient battlefield." Yang Yi smiled and didn't refuse again. "Yang Yi, you're heading to the ancient battlefield as well. Since it's like that, then let's go together." Meanwhile, Kai Yanyan spoke abruptly. Lu Weiwei gazed at him as well. Yang Yi glanced at Ling Jun, who was still twitching on the ground, and then he shook his head and said, "Both of you go on first. I still have matters to deal with." Lu Weiwei nodded and said, "Then we'll meet at the ancient battlefield." "All right," said Yang Yi with a smile on his face. After Lu Weiwei and Kai Yanyan left, Yang Yi turned around to gaze at Ling Jun, who was still twitching on the ground. At this moment, even though Ling Jun's body was still twitching, his eyes were open. However, his eyes were filled with resentment and strong fear. Obviously, he wished for nothing more than to eat Yang Yi's flesh and drink Yang Yi's blood right now. Yang Yi disregarded Ling Jun's resentful gaze and said indifferently, "I presume you are clearly aware of the situation you're in now. I'll get straight to the point. Tell me everything that you know. Don't hold back or lie, because living would become worse than death for you if you do that." Ling Jun spoke in a hoarse voice. "Would you give me a swift end if talk? Give you a swift end?" The corners of Yang Yi's mouth raised slightly to reveal slight ridicule. He said, "If you wanted to die, then why didn't you bite your tongue and take your own life? Or directly detonate your dantian? Since you don't want to die, then don't put on an act in front of me. Tell me everything you know. As for whether you die or not, that'll depend entirely on your performance." Ling Jun fell silent. He naturally didn't want to die. Otherwise, he should have taken his life at the instant that he was trapped by the violet mink. However, he hadn't done that. In other words, he wanted to live. However, he knew that if he wanted to live, it would be equivalent to betraying the League, and it was actually equivalent to death as well. The only difference was when death arrived. If it came later, then it meant that he had another period of time to live. When he thought up to here, Ling Jun closed his eyes slowly, and then he said, "What do you want to know?" The corners of Yang Yi's eyes twitched when he heard this, and then he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Even though Head said that Ling Jun was afraid of death, his intuition told him that this assassin wasn't afraid of death, and there ought to be a special reason why this assassin was acting in this way. Of course, he wasn't interested to find out what the special reason was. Because so long as this assassin didn't take his own life, then it would be equivalent to Yang Yi possessed a new lackey that was an extraordinary assassin. After 15 minutes passed, Yang Yi's expression had turned unsightly when he finished listening to Ling Jun. Because he found out that these 3 assassins who'd come for his life this time weren't sent by the Origin School, Ghost Sect, or the Flower Palace, and it was the Sword Sect instead. Even though Yang Yi didn't have even the slightest good impression of the Sword Sect, had still done a great deal for the Sword Sect out of consideration for Su Qingshi. However, not only did the Sword Sect not feel grateful, it even had the intent to kill him on many occasions. This time, it had even directly dispatched assassins to take his life. The Sword Sect. Yang Yi took a deep breath while his eyes were filled with an icy cold expression. This time, had placed the Sword Sect and the Flower Palace at a similar position in his perception. Right at this moment, Ling Jun suddenly said while he laid on the ground, "What are you going to do with me?" Yang Yi restrained his thoughts, gazed at Ling Jun, and then said, "My intuition tells me that you probably aren't one that fears death." Ling Jun revealed a miserable smile while his eyes were filled with a savage expression. He said, "My enemies are still alive, so how could I die?" "Enemies?" said Yang Yi with a frown on his face. Ling Jun knew that his fate was in Yang Yi's hands, so he didn't dare to be hostile and arrogant towards Yang Yi. He immediately said in a low voice, Perhaps you don't know how the League of Doom fosters assassins. Allow me to tell you how they do it. They start fostering assassins from a young age. In other words, they especially look for children below the age of 10 to foster. They search throughout the world for children with a good natural endowment, and so long as they find one, they definitely take the child with them and start fostering the child from a young age. Moreover, for the sake of making these children become utter tools of assassinations, they force these children to kill the people closest to them with their own 2 hands. They make the children kill the people closest to them? Yan Yes' expression changed slightly. Isn't the League of Doom a little too perverted? Ling Jun said with a savage expression on his face. That's nothing. For the sake of controlling these future top-rate assassins, they give these children a lethal poison from a young age. This lethal poison won't take our lives. However, living will be worse than death for us if we're unable to obtain the antidote every single month. It will be just like how it was for me earlier. So, in that way, you're suffering from a toxic poison right now? Yang Yi frowned as he asked this question. He wasn't interested at all in this person's sad and miserable life. Yang Yi only cared about a single thing, and it was whether this assassin could become an extraordinary goon that was under his command. Yes. Ling Jun didn't conceal it. If it's like that, then you're completely worthless, huh? Said Yang Yi in an indifferent tone. He would naturally not feel any pity towards an enemy. Even though this fellow's life was extremely tragic, he was still Yang Yi's enemy. Since it was an enemy, then it was best that his life was tragic, and it was even to the extent that Yang Yi would make his life a worse tragedy. Throughout these years, Yang Yi had understood a principle. One could have empathy, but one shouldn't extend such feelings to one's enemies. Because kindness to one's enemies was cruelty to oneself. Yang Yi was absolutely not do something stupid like rescuing someone only to be backstabbed right after. Ling Jun's eyelids twitched. Did I say all of that for nothing? Yes, the reason Head said all of that was because he hoped to obtain Yang Yi's pity. So long as Yang Yi pitied him, then he just had to sacrifice something or even his freedom, and then surviving wouldn't be difficult at all. But now, not only did Yang Yi feel no pity towards him at all, Yang Yi wanted to kill him because he had no value anymore. Is he still human? Is he still a human being? Yang Yi said indifferently. Give me a reason not to kill you. Otherwise, you can take your own life. Is a dead person useful to you? Ling Jun said. If you're able to dispel the poison for me, then it represents that you can do the same for the other assassins. In that way, I can contact other assassins to work for you. Yang Yi was slightly tempted. Head personally experienced the skill of these King Realm assassins. If he was able to take control of a group formed from mysterious assassins, then it would undoubtedly be an extremely good thing for him. All of you are being controlled by the League of Doom. However, if all of you come to work under me, I'll be utilizing a similar method to take control of all of you as well. If that's the case, would all of you still be willing? Asked Yang Yi. Yes. Ling Jun didn't hesitate at all and said, all of US members of the League of Doom can be said to have irreconcilable enmity with the League. If it wasn't for the poison, I believe that at least 80% or more assassins would betray the League. If you're able to dispel the poison that plagues them, then I guarantee that they'll definitely be willing to be controlled by you. After a short moment, Yang Yi shook his head and said, all of this is established on the foundation that I can dispel the poison for all of you. However, do you think I can? Even though I don't know what sort of poison all of you are suffering from, since the League of Doom utilized it to take control of the assassins under its command, then I presume it isn't just trash. Ling Jun fell silent when he heard this. Yes, just as Yang Yi said, the conditions he spoke of were established upon Yang Yi's ability to dispel the poison within their bodies. If Yang Yi was unable to accomplish that, then everything was just wishful thinking. Right at this moment, the violet mink on Yang Yi's shoulder had suddenly flashed and arrived in front of him, and then it started waving its little claws. You're saying that you can do it? Yang Yi was astounded. The violet mink shook its little head, and then it rubbed Yang Yi's stomach as if it was saying that mysterious vortex can. Yang Yi's eyes lit up. Right, How could I have forgotten the mysterious tiny vortex? Since I noticed the tiny vortex until now, there seems to have been nothing that the tiny vortex couldn't accomplish. So, dispelling poison shouldn't be difficult for the mysterious tiny vortex, right? When he thought up to here, Yang Yi gazed at Ling Jun and said, "What poison are you inflicted with?" Ling Jun shook his head and said, "I don't know as well. In any case, it was placed in our bodies from a very young age. Now, our blood, meridians, and skin ought to have poison within them." Yan Ye's eyelids twitched when he heard this. The League of Doom really is perverted. It actually utilized such a method to control these assassins. Of course, there was even more pleasant surprise in his heart. Because if the tiny vortex could dispel the poison, then it represented that it was very likely for the assassins of the League of Doom to belong to him, Yan Yi. If he had the assistance of this group of assassins, then Yan Yi would have even more confidence in his ability to face the Flower Palace or any other power. Yan Yi restrained his thoughts before he walked slowly towards Ling Jun, and then he stretched out his hand and placed it on Ling Jun's shoulder. After that, his consciousness entered Ling Jun's body to investigate the situation within Ling Jun's body. He was naturally not afraid of Ling Jun playing any tricks. After all, a strand of Ling Jun's soul was still in his possession. Thus, so long as Ling Jun wasn't an utter idiot, then Ling Jun wouldn't play any tricks at a time like this. At the moment that Yan Yi touched Ling Jun's arm, a wisp of a cold glow instantly flashed in Ling Jun's eyes. But in next to no time, that strand of a cold glow had vanished. Indeed, that instant just now was the best opportunity to kill Yan Yi. However, had given it up in the end, and the reason was none other than because he wasn't confident in his ability to kill Yan Yi. Chapter 287 Submission. Based on the understanding of Yang Yi that had obtained during this period, he knew that since Yang Yi dared to come close to him like this while not taking any precautions, then Yang Yi definitely had a method to protect himself. On the other hand, once he failed to kill Yang Yi, then endless torture and pain would be waiting for him. He truly didn't want to experience that pain from before that came from the depths of his soul. Since Yang Yi dared to come so close to this assassin, he naturally had a way to protect his life, and it was naturally the little fellow. If this fellow before him aroused any hostile intentions towards him, or make a move against him, then the little fellow would toss a strand of violet light over at the first possible moment. Was the attack speed of this assassin faster than the little fellow? The answer was an absolute no. After a short while, Yan Ye's expression had become completely solemn. Because he noticed that the poison Ling Jun suffered from was much more terrifying than had imagined. It wasn't just within Ling Jun's body. It should be said that Ling Jun's entire body was inflicted by the toxic poison, and Ling Jun could be described as a person that was full of poison. What sort of poison is this? Yan Yi withdrew his hand, and then he gazed at Ling Jun as he spoke with a solemn expression. Ling Jun laughed bitterly and shook his head as he said, "I don't know. ID looked for some alchemists and toxicologists in the past, but not even one knew what sort of poison this was. Besides the antidote, the only other ways to eliminate this poison is to seek the assistance of a Monarch Realm expert or become a Monarch Realm expert myself." "You're saying that even Exalt Realm experts are unable to eliminate this poison?" said Yang Yi in a low voice. "It's not that they're impossible to eliminate it." Ling Jun shook his head and said, "If I'd just been inflicted with this poison, then the strength of an Exalt Realm expert should be sufficient to dispel it without encountering much difficulty. However, the problem is that we've been suffering from it since a young age. At this point in time, the poison has already fused into one with our bodies. So, it's probably impossible to dispel even if we attain the Exalt Realm. The League of Doom really is ruthless," Yang Yi said in a light voice. "In this way, all of you'll be eternally in their control unless all of you attain the Monarch Realm." "The Monarch Realm?" Ling Jun laughed with self-ridicule and said, "We'll probably never be able to attain the Monarch Realm in our entire lives. Or even if we're able, but would they allow us to become Monarch Realm experts and escape their control?" Yang Yi shook his head and didn't answer Ling Jun. At this moment, he was thinking of a method to deal with the poison in Ling Jun's body. He had no doubt that if it had been inflicted by this poison, then the tiny vortex would definitely be able to dispel it with ease even if the poison had seeped deep into his bones. However, the problem was that the poison wasn't in his body but the body of another. So, he had a problem. The tiny vortex was within his body, so it would lend a hand when his life was threatened. However, it was impossible to make the tiny vortex help on its own. Just like this very moment, Yang Yi had asked countless times for the tiny vortex's help, but it didn't display any reaction at all. In other words, it was impossible for him to get the tiny vortex to help. If the tiny vortex didn't help, then Ling Jun would definitely die. Dejection slowly crept into Ling Jun's eyes when he saw Yang Yi remain silent. After a short while, he said in a low voice, "You ought to be clearly aware that there's another assassin in the shadows that's waiting for his chance to assassinate you. I can help you deal with him." "What's your condition?" asked Yang Yi with an indifferent tone. "Let me leave," Ling Jun said. "Even though I don't know what you've done to me, I know that if you want to kill me, then it would probably require a single thought from you. Moreover, I'm more useful to you while I'm alive because the person I want to kill is the person who gave the order to assassinate you. How confident are you in your ability to kill that person?" asked Yang Yi in an indifferent tone. "I have no confidence at all," Ling Jun said. "I've told you about it earlier. No matter if it's the Earth Assassins, Blood Assassins, or Heaven Assassins, there's an Exalt Assassin amongst them." "What's an Exalt Assassin?" "It's one that has never failed. Even though he's at the King Realm as well, the gap between us is huge." "In other words, you're just courting death?" said Yang Yi. Ling Jun said. "But it's better than dying meaninglessly at your hands. If I try to kill him, then even if I die, I would be considered to have tried to avenge my loved ones, right?" Yang Yi fell silent. He naturally didn't care about Ling Jun's fate, and he merely cared about whether he could get an assassin as his subordinate. Moreover, it was even an elite assassin. He truly didn't wish to give up such an opportunity. After a short while, Yang Yi said, "I might have a method to dispel the poison for you. However, the process will probably be slightly painful." "You can dispel the poison?" Ling Jun suddenly raised his head to gaze at Yang Yi while his eyes were filled with excitement. What did this mean? It meant that he could escape the League of Doom's control in the future, and it represented that he could disregard the poison that once plagued him and make a move against the members of the League of Doom. In other words, he could take revenge for his loved ones. "I can't be certain that it'll succeed, but we should give it a try, right?" said Yang Yi. "Of course." Ling Jun naturally wouldn't refuse. Even if it was only a shred of hope, he still didn't want to give up on it. Yang Yi nodded. With a flick of his finger, a strand of ghastly white flame appeared on his palm, and the temperature in the surroundings instantly rose when this strand of white flame appeared. Ling Jun's pupils constricted violently when he saw this strand of ghastly white flame because he was able to sense how terrifying the energy within the flame was. "My method is to send this flame into your body and circulate it through the meridians within your body. We'll be utilizing the high temperature of the flame to incinerate the poison within your body. Of course, I'm not confident that it will succeed, and the slightest mistake might transform you into a pile of ash." Yang Yi spoke casually. "Of course, if it succeeds, then you'll gain new life and escape the control of your enemies. Do I have a choice?" Ling Jun laughed bitterly. If he chose to refuse, then this fellow before him would probably kill him on the spot. Yang Yi smiled. Ling Jun was right, he didn't have a choice at all. Because if he chose to refuse, then Yang Yi wouldn't hesitate to annihilate him on the spot. Since Ling Jun couldn't be of use to him, and was his enemy, he felt that it was best that Ling Jun was dead. With a flick of his finger, the nether ghost flame directly entered Ling Jun's body. In an instant, H! A grievous shrill cry resounded, and it shot into the sky. If he knew the flame was so terrifying, then Ling Jun wouldn't have agreed to it no matter what. Because it was truly too painful. How should this pain be described? One could say that it was like being roasted by a ball of flames. Moreover, it was like being roasted from inside out. Most importantly, he was still fully conscious. Now, he finally knew that when the pain from this flame was compared to the pain he suffered from the poison in the past, the pain from the poison was simply like child's play. Yan Yi frowned as he gazed at Ling Jun, who was shivering on the ground, and he said, "Can you be a little more composer? You're a King Realm expert at any rate, so you shouldn't make such an embarrassing display, right? Isn't it just a ball of flames?" Ling Jun was almost angered to the point of falling unconscious when he heard this. "What do you mean by it's just a ball of flames? How can you speak so heartlessly?" Yan Yi didn't care about the pain Ling Jun felt. He controlled the nether ghost flames to flow incessantly through Ling Jun's body. For the sake of keeping this extraordinary goon of his alive, Yan Yi was very serious. He had no choice because the slightest mistake would probably cause Ling Jun to be instantly evaporated into thin air. If Ling Jun died, then his future group of extraordinary assassins would be gone. 15 minutes later, numerous beads of sweat had appeared on Yan Yi's face. However, he revealed slight happiness from his eyes. Because he noticed that the nether ghost flame was effective against the poison within Ling Jun's body. Everywhere the nether ghost flame passed, the poison within Ling Jun's meridians and blood would be instantly evaporated and transform into nothingness. In other words, it was only a matter of time now. After around an hour passed, Yan Yi gestured with his hand and the strand of ghastly white flame emerged from Ling Jun's body and flew into his palm. After he put the nether ghost flame away, Yan Yi gazed at Ling Jun and said indifferently, 90% of the poison within your body is gone, and the remaining bit of poison within your body will be unable to affect you at all. You ought to know what you should do if you want the remaining poison to be eliminated." Ling Jun closed his eyes slightly and sensed the condition of his body. After a short while, he opened his eyes while a wisp of wild joy appeared in his eyes. But in next to no time, Ling Jun calmed down because while the poison had been eliminated, he had another problem before him. A King Realm expert like him was naturally unwilling to obey the orders of a profounder at the First Heaven Realm. However, he knew that if he tried to flee or try anything at this moment, then the consequences would be extremely horrifying. In next to no time, he thought of a method, and it was to agree for now. Yan Yi grunted coldly when he saw Ling Jun remain silent. With a command in his heart, a strand of sword intent shot towards that strand of Ling Jun's soul. In an instant, "Ah!" Another shrill cry suddenly resounded. Ling Jun instantly fell to the ground while his feature had instantly warped. "Stay your hand? I am willing to submit to you." Ling Jun forcefully endured the pain that came from the depths of his soul, and he begged for mercy in a hoarse voice. Yan Yi said indifferently, "Don't challenge my patience. If you do that again, then I would rather torture you to death than keep you alive. You can feel free to try if you don't believe me." "No, it won't happen again." This time, Ling Jun was speaking sincerely. Because he noticed that Yan Yi hadn't done anything, yet had suffered such pain. In other words, Yan Yi had definitely executed some sort of mysterious technique against him, and this technique was even more terrifying than the poison. "Ha ha!" Right at this moment, Ling Yin suddenly appeared here. His face was covered in an expression of ridicule and mocking as he gazed at Ling Jun, who was begging for mercy on the ground, and he said, "I truly never expected that you Ling Jun would actually be reduced to such a state. I truly never expected this. Ha ha!" Chapter 288 The Poor Ling Yin. As he gazed at Ling Yin, who had made a sudden appearance here, a wisp of ridicule flashed through Ling Jun's eyes. This idiot actually dared to appear fearless before us because he thinks his movement technique is mysterious and unfathomable. What's it like to court death? What's it like to be an idiot? Ling Yin is both. Yan Yi was stunned as well because he hadn't expected that Ling Yin would actually appear openly before him. What does this fellow intend to do? Ling Yin glanced at Yan Yi before he gazed at Ling Jun, who laid on the ground. As for the violet mink on Yan Yi's shoulder, head directly disregarded it. Tisk tsk. Ling Jun, I truly never imagined that you would actually be reduced to such a state when facing a profounder at the first heaven realm. TSK. You're even begging for mercy from him. I truly didn't expect that even you, Ling Jun, would be reduced to such a state one day. Ling Yin gazed at Ling Jun while he shook his head and spoke slowly. He naturally didn't take Yang Yi serious because if he wanted to leave, then not to mention a profounder at the first heaven realm, even a spirit realm expert who could form wings with profound energy would be unable to catch up to him. Did he have to care about a tiny profounder at the first heaven realm when he possessed that mysterious movement technique? The answer was no. Yang Yi didn't make a move. On the contrary, he gazed with interest at this assassin who had made a sudden appearance here. The heavens really are too kind to me. I just finished subduing an extraordinary goon, and it has sent me another. Ling Jun glanced at Ling Yin as if he was looking at a moron, and then he said, Ling Yin, I merely thought that you were brave but not astute in the past. But now it would seem like even that is a form of praise to you. You're simply an extraordinarily huge idiot. You simply have the brain of a pig. Our strengths are almost on par, yet I've been reduced to such a state now. Could it be that you didn't consider the reason for this? If I were you, I would have turned around and fled at the first possible moment, yet you showed yourself recklessly. Saying that you have the brain of a pig is an insult to pigs. Ling Yin's expression changed when he heard this. Right, why didn't I think of this? Ling Jun's strength is definitely stronger than my own, yet why has he been reduced to such a state? When he thought up to here, he turned to gaze at Yang Yi, who was gazing at him with a mocking expression, and his heart shook. What sort of gaze is that? When he noticed that the situation was bad, Ling Yin's figure flashed, and he intended to retreat. However, it was already too late. A violet barrier of light had suddenly appeared around him. Ling Jun instantly seemed to take pleasure in Ling Yin's misfortune when he saw the violet barrier of light. I finally have a companion now. Ling Yin cried out in his heart when he saw the violet barrier of light. Shit! He didn't hesitate at all to swing his palm at the barrier of light. However, it didn't move at all, and right when he was about to continue attacking, a strand of violet light had suddenly appeared in front of him. Bang! Ling Yin was blasted flying. Continue! Right, leave him on the verge of death, said Yang Yi in an indifferent tone. This assassin before him, Ling Yin, was clearly a rebellious fellow, so Yang Yi felt that he had to pull out Ling Yin's teeth before he had a discussion with Ling Yin. The violet mink swung out another few dozen strands of violet light under Yang Yi's orders. Fortunately, the violet mink controlled the strength of the violet light, and these strands of violet light could only cause pain but not death to Ling Yin. Even though it was like that, it was still torture to Ling Yin. After an hour had passed, Ling Yin was on the verge of death, and he was in an even more miserable state than the state Ling Jun had been in just now. Yang Yi didn't waste his breath at all, nor did he ask for Ling Yin's opinion. He directly asked the violet mink to extract a strand of Ling Yin's soul. Because Ling Yin was aware during this process, the pain from the extraction of his soul caused Ling Yin to fall unconscious, and this scene caused Ling Jun's body to tremble. After half an hour passed, Ling Yin regained his consciousness. When he saw Yang Yi, a savage expression and killing intent had instantly appeared in Ling Yin's eyes. Yang Yi grunted coldly when he saw Ling Yin's expression, and then he withdrew a high-grade talisman and slapped it onto Ling Yin before he said, Continue blasting him! Ling Jun. The violet mink would naturally not refuse. It waved its little claw, and then over 10 strands of violet light instantly blasted onto Ling Yin before he fainted once more. 15 minutes later, Ling Yin woke up from the effect of Yang Yi's healing talisman. A ferocious glow immediately arose in his eyes when he saw Yang Yi, and he even intended to attack. Continue blasting him! Continue! 2 hours later, Ling Yin woke up again. This time, he didn't reveal a ferocious glow in his eyes upon catching sight of Yang Yi. There was only deep fear and reverence in his eyes. However, Yang Yi seemed to have become accustomed to giving the command, and he didn't hesitate at all upon seeing Ling Yin wake up. Continue! As he spoke, he slapped another high-grade healing talisman onto Ling Yin. He had a bunch of talismans, so he could do as he liked. So, the poor Ling Yin's fate was tragic. 15 minutes later, Ling Yin woke up once more. This time, the first thing he said after he opened his eyes was, "I admit defeat!" This caused Yang Yi, who was about to give the order again, to be stunned. He actually admitted defeat. However, right at this moment, over 10 strands of violet light blasted at his body once more. At the instant before he fell unconscious, Ling Yin howled with sorrow in his heart. "I fucking admitted defeat. What else do you want? I already admitted defeat. Big brother. I admitted defeat. Even if you want to kill me, just give me a swift death, alright? Alright?" Yang Yi was stunned as well because he hadn't given the order. Yang Yi gazed at the violet mink, and the violet mink blinked before it shrugged in response. It seemed to be saying that it had gotten used to doing that. Both Yang Yi and Ling Jun were speechless, and their gazes towards Ling Yin were filled with pity. He really suffered such a tragic fate. After another 15 minutes passed, Ling Yin woke up once more. This time, he didn't gaze at Yang Yi but at the violet mink instead, and his eyes were filled with fear and horror as he gazed at this tiny fellow before him. If he knew that this mysterious king-rank dark beast was so terrifying, then he wouldn't have shown himself no matter what. However, it was too late for all of that. "Do you want to live or die?" Yang Yi said frankly. "If you want to live, then you ought to know what you must do. If you want to die, then take your own life. It'll absolutely not stop you." The corners of Ling Yin's mouth twitched. Take my own life. No one wanted to die. Even ants wanted to drag out their insignificant existence, let alone humans. Ling Yin naturally chose to live, and this choice made Yang Yi very happy. Of course, he wasn't happy that Ling Yin could live, and he was happy because he got another extraordinary assassin to fight for him. So, no matter if it was against the disciples from the 6 great powers or the monstrous geniuses of the other territories, he had another trump card to be used during his trip to the ancient battlefield. After he found out that Yang Yi could help him dispel the poison, the resistance Ling Yin had towards Yang Yi had instantly vanished greatly. Even though he would be under Yang Yi's control once the poison was dispelled, it was much better than being controlled by his enemies. Moreover, from this day onward, he could fully escape the League of Doom, and he could even make a move against the League. "I want to return to the Southern Territory." Right at this moment, Ling Jun spoke abruptly. Yang Yi frowned and said, "Why?" "Because he wanted to bring the two of them to the ancient battlefield with him." Ling Jun said in a low voice, "There are numerous assassins like Ling Yin and me at the Southern Territory. Of course, their strengths aren't as formidable as us, and it's even to the extent that many are merely at the mortal realm and first heaven realm. However, their potential is extremely great. If you're able to dispel the poison for them, then they'll definitely be willing to serve you. In this way, we wouldn't just be able to obtain even more help, we would even be able to weaken the overall strength of the League of Doom. How confident are you in your ability to make them come to me?" asked Yang Yi in a low voice. "Over 90%. Ling Jun said in a low voice. "All of them have irreconcilable enmity with the League of Doom. They will definitely not refuse if they're able to escape the League's control. However, in this way, it's very likely that we'll become targets of the League. It's even to the extent that the League might dispatch Earth assassins who are spirit realm experts to kill us." "That doesn't matter," Yang Yi said. "In any case, they can't enter the ancient battlefield, and they can't make a move against us even if they do." "So you've agreed?" asked Ling Jun. "Of course." Yang Yi smiled and said, "Both you and Ling Yin can return to the Southern Territory. Try your best to find those assassins of the League, and then bring them to me at the ancient battlefield. It's probably not difficult for all of you to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains and head to the ancient battlefield with the movement technique all of you possess. So long as you've entered the ancient battlefield, you'll naturally be able to find the two of you." Meanwhile, Ling Yin suddenly said, "Aren't you afraid that we would flee?" Yang Yi replied with a question. "Would the two of you even dare?" Ling Yin grunted coldly and said, "Why not? Could it be that you would be able to find us once we've gone far from you and that mysterious king-rank dark beast? Yang Yi smiled and said, Feel free to give it a try. Ling Yin fell silent. Earlier, he still held a trace of hope that Yan Yi's method of control required a certain level of with them. In other words, Yan Yi could only keep them under his control while they were by Yan Yi's side. But Yan Yi's attitude right now allowed him to realize that the method Yan Yi utilized to take control of them wasn't restricted by distance at all. When they thought up to here, a wisp of sorrow flashed in the eyes of Ling Jun and Ling Yin. They didn't want to die, but they didn't want their freedom to be in the hands of another as well. Just think about it, how could anyone be truly willing to fight on another's behalf? However, they had no choice now. As if he knew what they were thinking, Yan Yi hesitated for a moment before he said, I only need both of you by my side for 10 years, and I'll return your freedom to you after that time. 10 years were enough for him, because he was confident that he didn't need anyone to fight on his behalf after 10 years had passed. Ling Yin and Ling Jun had both swiftly raised their heads to look at Qin Shi when they heard this, and they said with excitement, Really? Of course. Yang Yi said. Since I said it's for 10 years, then it's 10 years. Of course, if both of you only pretend to obey my orders or make me feel dissatisfied during these 10 years of time, then there'll be no need to wait for those 10 years of time because they'll make you vanish from the world right away. We absolutely won't. They hurriedly guaranteed. Perhaps 10 years was an extremely long period of time for an ordinary person, but it was only a blink of the eye to profounders. Chapter 289 Advancement. Ling Jun and Ling Yin had left. Yan Yi was naturally not worried about them fleeing or arousing other ill intent when a strand of their souls was in his possession. Because even if they were extremely far away from each other, he merely had to issue a single command in his heart, and living would be worse than death to them. So, he was entirely not worried that they would play any tricks or refuse to return. On the Lightning Eagle, Yan Yi's thoughts drifted as he gazed at the dense forests and mountains that were ceaselessly shrinking in his gaze. Since he had dealt with the surprise attacks of the assassins, he naturally didn't have to continue heading to the ancient battlefield on foot. Even Yan Yi felt slight anticipation towards the ancient battlefield. After all the monstrous geniuses of the entire continent would be gathered there. Regardless of whether it was quality or quantity, the monstrous geniuses here weren't existences that the geniuses who participated in the Ascension rankings could compare to. Yan Yi wanted to see the monstrous geniuses of the other territories, and he wanted to see exactly how great the gap between him and them was. Of course, he hadn't forgotten the reason he'd come to the ancient battlefield. Improving his strength was his main objective. After a few confrontations with the Flower Palace, Yan Yi had deeply understood a single principle, and it was that his strength was truly too weak. Not to mention going against the Flower Palace, if it wasn't for the Talisman Masters Association and the founding emperor of the Grand Qin Empire, he would have probably died a long time ago. He had the protection of the Talisman Masters Association and the founding emperor in the past, but what about the future? Could it continue placing his hopes on others in the future? The answer was no. So, if he wanted to rescue his mother, then he had to rely on himself. However, he felt a deep feeling of powerlessness whenever he thought about the colossus which was the Flower Palace. No matter how extraordinary his potential was or how monstrous his natural talent was, he was merely an ant in the eyes of the Flower Palace right now. He could only rescue his mother by utilizing strategy and wits but not force. This was a fact that Yan Yi had just understood. Even such a colossus like the Flower Palace had its enemies like the Grand Qin Empire and various other enemies that he was unaware of. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. If he wanted to deal with the Flower Palace, then the only way was to gather these powers that were hostile towards the Flower Palace. Of course, he had to possess a power of his own as well. So, that was the reason why he had chosen to expose the Nether Ghost Flame and help dispel the poison within both Ling Jun and Ling Yin. If they were able to bring even more assassins to him, then coupled with the king-rank dark beasts he possessed, he would be slightly more confident in his ability to go against the Flower Palace in the future. If he wanted to subdue even more dark beasts, then the only way was to improve his cultivation and allow the tiny vortex to enlarge swiftly. So, during the following period of time, Yang Yi started to cultivate madly. He had no lack of energy stones, and he even had some top-grade energy stones, so he could cultivate without worrying about anything. After he consumed almost 10,000 energy stones, Yang Yi had finally advanced, and had advanced by 2 ranks in succession to attain the peak of the First Heaven Realm's 9th rank. Now, he merely lacked a critical factor in order to enter into the King Realm. On the other hand, if he lacked this critical factor, then it would probably be impossible for him to advance even if he consumed 10,000 energy stones. So, Yang Yi could only temporarily put his intentions to advance into the King Realm aside. Yang Yi opened his eyes on the lightning eagle, and then he rose his head slightly and gazed towards the azure sky and white clouds in the distance. After that, he took a deep breath while shock that couldn't be concealed appeared in his eyes. Merely around 10 days had passed since Head started absorbing the energy within the energy stones, and it was exactly this short period of time that allowed him to advance from the 7th rank of the First Heaven Realm into the peak of the First Heaven Realm's 9th rank. Head directly advanced by 2 ranks in just 10 days of time. Isn't such speed a little too fast? Yang Yi was naturally clearly aware that the speed of his advancement was definitely related to the tiny vortex, and it was exactly the reason why Yang Yi was deeply shocked. Exactly what is the background of the tiny vortex? Where exactly did it come from? Since I've noticed the tiny vortex until now, it seems to be all-powerful, and it seems like there's nothing it can't deal with. Even the Nether Ghost Flame wasn't able to resist the tiny vortex at all. Besides that, Elder Mu, who possesses unfathomable strength, and those other peak figures like Taoist Sui and the Founding Emperor were actually unable to notice the tiny vortex that resides within me. What exactly is the tiny vortex? Why does it possess such terrifying ability? What other abilities of it have I not discovered yet? Of course, the most important question is, why is it in my possession? Yang Yi laughed bitterly as he shook his head. It wasn't that Head never thought about all of this in the past, and it was instead because he was unable to come to any conclusion every single time that he thought about it. This time was the same as well. So, as he always said, it was fine so long as the tiny vortex didn't harm him. After he straightened out his thoughts, Yang Yi stood up and issued a summon in his heart. A strand of violet light flashed before the violet mink appeared in front of him. "Little fellow, do you have other abilities?" asked Yang Yi. Every single time the little fellow's cultivation advanced, it would obtain some new abilities, and that was the reason why Yang Yi had asked such a question. The violet mink blinked, thought for a moment, and then its eyes suddenly lit up. After that, it waved its little claw at Yang Yi. No violet light flashed, or it should be said that nothing seemed to have happened at all. However, Yang Yi was directly stunned on the spot, because he noticed to his shock that the hidden sword in his hand and the spatial rings that he wore had vanished. Yang Yi gulped down a mouthful of saliva and said, "Little fellow, what did you do to them?" The violet mink blinked, and then it waved its claw once more. The hidden sword and the spatial rings instantly appeared in front of Yang Yi, and Yang Yi was stunned once more when he saw them appear out of thin air, because he'd been utterly unable to notice exactly how they'd appeared there. If the culprit wasn't right before him, he would absolutely not believe that something like this was actually possible. Because no matter if it was the hidden sword or the spatial rings, there was a trace of his spiritual brand on them. However, Yang Yi had clearly sensed the spiritual brand vanish at the instant that they vanished. Isn't this a little too terrifying? If the little fellow is with someone else and does this to me, then... When he thought up to here, Yang Yi couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. What other new abilities do you possess?" Yang Yi suppressed the shock in his heart, and continued. The violet mink thought for a moment, and then it wasn't long before it started waving its little claw again. This time, a violet-colored energy sword appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then the little fellow waved its claws swiftly under Yang Yi's astonished gaze, causing an extremely strange scene to appear here. The violet energy sword was originally in front of Yang Yi. However, along with a wave of the little fellow's claw, it appeared behind Yang Yi in the next moment. After that, another swing of its claw caused the sword to directly appear above Yang Yi. The next swing made it appear on Yang Yi's left. Just like this, the violet energy sword constantly changed positions, and it caused Yang Yi's jaw to hit the ground. Yang Yi had always thought that his sword control technique was extremely mysterious and swift, but when it was compared to this technique of the little fellow's, he finally noticed that his sword control technique was simply weak to the extreme. If it was a comparison of speed, then the little fellow's technique completely crushed the sword control technique's speed. If it was a comparison of strength, then the sword control technique's might was utterly inferior to the violet energy sword unless it was enhanced by sword intent. Of course, the most terrifying part about this ability was the energy swords that could appear out of nowhere because they were truly impossible to take precautions against. Perhaps even Yuan Tong would have an extreme headache if he had to deal with such energy swords. Right at this moment, the violet mink started waving its little claws again, and then almost 100 violet energy swords appeared in front of Yang Yi. After that, they started to flutter about in the sky while Yang Yi watched with a dumbstruck expression. Moreover, the scene of 100 energy swords flickering about in the sky was simply. A chill ran down Yang Yi's spine. The violet mink seemed to be enjoying it too much, and it ceaselessly waved its little claws about. Moreover, as it waved its claws about, the 100 energy swords in the sky started to form all sorts of strange sword formations. Of course, the most important point was that it was impossible to track these energy swords. For example, they'd formed a square-shaped sword formation earlier, but they would instantly transform into a round-shaped sword formation in the next moment. Yes, it was a direct transformation, and there was no process to it at all. Yang Yi knew that the little fellow was copying the sword formations of his sword chest, and if its might was disregarded, then this shocking method of attack was utterly superior to the sword formation of his sword chest. The shocking speed at which it transformed and moved at was probably something that even spirit realm experts were unable to avoid. As expected of the spatial mink clan of the demon territory. Even though you're still at a juvenile stage, you already possess such shocking spatial techniques. Right at this moment, a sigh suddenly resounded from above the lightning eagle. Yang Yi's expression changed. Someone has actually arrived here. And the violet mink was actually unable to notice this person's appearance. Such strength is. When he thought up to here, Yang Yi seemed as if he was up against a great enemy, and the sword chest appeared in his hand with a flip of his palm. At the same time, the profound energy within his body started surging violently. At this moment, the violet mink had stopped waving its claws, and it blinked incessantly as it gazed towards the surroundings as if it was saying, "Why can't I notice this person?" Right at this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared on the lightning eagle. Yang Yi instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this middle-aged man because it was none other than that middle-aged man who'd given him a command token that day and asked him to visit the Dark Beast Empire when he was free. Right at this moment, the 100 violet energy swords in the air had suddenly vanished on the spot. In the next moment, they'd already appeared in front of the middle-aged man. Obviously, the little fellow had launched an attack because the middle-aged man's sudden appearance had displeased the little fellow. Yang Yi was instantly alarmed in his heart when he witnessed this scene. Right when he was about to act, the middle-aged man grinned and said, "Stop!" As soon as the middle-aged man's voice escaped his lips, the 100 energy swords had suddenly and strangely stopped in midair, as if time had stopped. Chapter 290 The Beast Emperor. The violet mink's eyes opened wide as it stared fixedly at the middle-aged man who stood before it. Obviously, it was shocked by this middle-aged man's abilities. Yang Yi was shocked as well. In the past, he was aware that this mysterious middle-aged man's strength was extremely formidable, but had never imagined that this middle-aged man's strength would actually be terrifying to such an extent. Because the middle-aged man hadn't done anything from the beginning, and had just spoken the word "stop" in a flat tone. After that, the 100 terrifying violet energy swords that were controlled by the little fellow had been stopped just like that. What sort of ability is this? Exactly what sort of strength does this middle-aged man possess? Is he at the Exalt realm? Or perhaps the Monarch realm? Yang Yi suppressed the shock and questions in his heart as he said, "Senior, we meet again." The middle-aged man grinned, and then the energy swords in front of him vanished directly as if they'd never been there. This caused Yang Yi to be even more shocked. Yang Yi said in his heart, "This middle-aged man's strength is definitely not inferior to Taoist Sui and the founding emperor." A wisp of surprise flashed through the middle-aged man's eyes as he gazed at Yang Yi, and then he said, "Fourth level sword intent, the peak of the first heaven realm's 9th rank, a physical body that's on par with the spirit rank dark beast, and even the enlightened sword heart. Human kid, you've really surprised me." Yang Yi shook his head and didn't reply to this. He said instead, "I wonder why Senior has come here this time? To meet it." The middle-aged man gazed at the violet mink while a wisp of a complicated expression flashed through his eyes. He said, "As expected of one that's favored by the heavens. You're already halfway into the spirit rank at such a young age, and you even possess such mysterious innate spatial abilities. Is this because of your bloodline? It truly is a cause for envy." The violet mink blinked and didn't say anything. The middle-aged man wanted to say something, but he hesitated for a long time and didn't speak of it in the end. He merely sighed heavily, and the helplessness and unwillingness in it was something that even Yang Yi could sense clearly. When he saw the middle-aged man act in this way, Yang Yi started calculating in his mind. This middle-aged man's strength is definitely not inferior to Taoist Sui and the founding ancestor. If I'm able to form a relationship with such an expert, or make him owe me a favor, then I'll have another trump card and even more confidence when I face the Flower Palace in the future. When he thought up to here, Yang Yi stopped hesitating and immediately decided and said, "Senior, I presume you haven't come twice to look for the little fellow merely to meet the little fellow, right?" When he spoke up to here, Yang Yi paused for a moment before he continued. "If Senior needs our assistance, then so long as it's within our ability, both the little fellow and I can give it a try." A strand of bright light flashed in the middle-aged man's eyes when he heard this, and he said with slight excitement, "Are you serious?" When he finished speaking, he continued, "Can you represent it?" Yang Yi smiled, and then he gazed at the violet mink. The latter flashed over to Yang Ye's shoulder, and then it rubbed Yang Ye's ears with its little claws in an extremely intimate manner. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly when he witnessed this scene, and then he glanced deeply at Yang Yi before he said, "Human kid, you're really making me more and more curious about you. Tell me, what are your conditions?" Yang Yi shook his head and said, "It would be best if Senior told us what you need from us first." He wasn't stupid. Wouldn't he be courting death if the middle-aged man wanted him and the little fellow to do something that was heaven-defying? What a cautious fellow! The middle-aged man chuckled and said, "Don't worry. I won't ask the two of you to do something that exceeds the scope of your abilities. I merely want to ask how it came to the Southern Territory." As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man gazed at the violet mink. Yang Yi frowned. He naturally didn't believe that the middle-aged man had come looking for them merely to ask this. After a long period of deep thought, Yang Yi said, "Senior, this is probably not the full extent of your objective, right? Smart human." The middle-aged man grinned, and then he gazed at the violet mink and revealed a solemn expression as he said, "Under the circumstances where no experts have weakened the seal, it shouldn't and couldn't appear in the Southern Territory. However, the problem is that it has appeared here. In other words, there's another method besides traversing the seals that can be utilized to move through the various territories. It's probably not difficult to traverse the seals with the strength Senior possesses, right?" asked Yang Yi. "It isn't difficult," the middle-aged man said. "However, if I leave the Southern Territory, then my Dark Beast Empire would probably be instantly annihilated by the humans. Moreover, they'll have to try and overcome the Heaven Path in the near future, and no matter if I succeed or fail, I wouldn't be able to appear in the Southern Territory again. At that time, The myriad of dark beasts in my dark beast empire would probably be enslaved by the humans, Yang Yi said with surprise. Senior intends to migrate all the dark beasts from the dark beast empire to the other territories? The middle-aged man nodded and said, even though dark beasts and humans are living in harmony right now, the humans will definitely act against my dark beast race in the future. With the greedy nature of humans, how could they not be tempted by the inner cores we dark beasts possess and the countless natural treasures within the grand myriad mountains? They'll definitely act against my dark beast race. The reason they haven't until now is because of my presence, but once I'm gone, then the grand myriad mountains would probably become the backyard of the humans. Yang Yi smiled bitterly when he heard this. Even though he was a human as well, he had no choice but to admit that this mysterious middle-aged man made sense. Because how could anyone not be tempted by the countless natural treasures of the heavens and the earth within the grand myriad mountains, and the inner cores of the dark beasts from the dark beast empire? The middle-aged man said in a low voice, if the two of you are able to bring my dark beast race to the other territories, right, it's best if it's the demon territory. But if you're able to accomplish that, then this emperor will agree to anything. When he heard the words this emperor, Yang Yi's eyelids twitched, and he said, Senior is the beast emperor of the dark beast empire? The middle-aged man nodded and said, we dark beasts don't go back on our word like you humans do. You'll definitely do as I've said. Yang Yi instantly gasped when he heard the middle-aged man acknowledge his guess. No wonder this middle-aged man's strength was so terrifying. So, he's actually the owner of the Grand Myriad Mountains. After feeling shocked, Yang Yi couldn't help but feel excited because if the little fellow was able to help the middle-aged man, then wouldn't it mean that the Beast Emperor owed him a huge favor? When he thought up to here, Yang Yi turned to look at the violet mink. However, the violet mink brought him back to reality because it shook its little head before their gazes to display that it was unable to accomplish it. A wisp of disappointment that was impossible to be concealed had flashed through the Beast Emperor's eyes when he saw the violet mink shake its head, and then he muttered in a low voice. Could it be that the heavens really want to doom my dark beast race? Yang Yi frowned. He pondered deeply for a short moment before he said lightly, Little fellow, how did you get here? When he heard Yang Yi, the Beast Emperor gazed at the violet mink as well. Obviously, he wanted to know the answer as well. A layer of red instantly covered the violet mink's little face when it heard Yang Yi, and then its eyes immediately started to spin about. Obviously, it didn't want to answer this question. Yang Yi rubbed the little fellow's head and said, Stop playing around. It's very important to us. The violet mink puckered its face, and then it started to wave its little claws. After a period of conversation, Yang Yi finally understood why the violet mink had appeared in the southern territory. The reason was actually that it was playful. The general idea was that a battle had occurred in its clan at the demon territory, and that battle caused a mysterious spatial vortex to appear in her clan. The violet mink had been curious and playful, so it entered the spatial vortex when its loved ones weren't paying attention. After that, when it appeared once more, it was at this unfamiliar place, the Southern Territory. Yang Yi didn't know whether he should laugh or cry after he figures out what the little fellow meant. This little fellow actually even dared to enter a spatial vortex. Spatial vortexes are so dangerous that even an Exalt Realm expert would probably not dare to casually enter a spatial vortex. The Beast Emperor shook his head and smiled as well. Obviously, he hadn't expected that the little fellow had got to the Southern Territory in such a way. He could create a spatial vortex as well, but would anyone dare to enter it? He was clearly aware of the dangers and terrors that resided within spatial vortexes, and the slightest mistake could cause even an Exalt Realm expert to be instantly torn into pieces. Even if one were to survive out of luck, who knew where one would be teleported to by the spatial vortex? In short, his intentions to migrate the Dark Beast race could be said to have ended in failure. The Beast Emperor shook his head with a helpless expression on his face, and he was just about to leave. However, right at this moment, the violet mink suddenly flashed over to the Beast Emperor, and then numerous ripples floated towards the Beast Emperor. After that, the Beast Emperor's eyes gradually opened wider. After a short moment, the Beast Emperor gazed at Yang Yi. He gazed at Yan Yi for a short while before he gazed once more at the violet mink, and then he said, I believe you. Because since you chose him, then he's absolutely not an ordinary person. When he spoke up to hear, the Beast Emperor pondered deeply for a moment before he said, Can my dark beast race become a vassal of your clan in the demon territory? There were countless formidable demon beast clans in the demon territory, and these demon beast clans were absolutely not existences that the dark beasts of the Dark Beast Empire could compare to. If the dark beasts were to rashly enter the demon territory without any backing, then they would definitely become the slaves of those demon beast clans. If it was like that, then wouldn't it be better to take the initiative to become the vassal of a formidable demon beast clan? Even though they would be a mere vassal, they would have their dignity. This time, the violet mink fell silent. If it was according to its opinion, or the opinion of those old fellows in its clan, then it was absolutely impossible. Because the bloodlines of these dark beasts was too inferior. An inferior bloodline represented that these dark beasts possessed low potential, and low potential represented that their future accomplishments would be low. To put it simply, it was slightly embarrassing to take these dark beasts from the Southern Territory as its clan's vassal. The reason the violet mink hadn't refused was that it knew what these dark beasts, and this middle-aged man meant to Yan Yi. Yan Yi's strength was really too weak, and these dark beasts, and this middle-aged man just happened to be able to help Yan Yi. Chapter 291 Violet Gold Armor. After a short moment of silence, the violet mink glanced at Yan Yi before it nodded. Right when the Beast Emperor was delighted, strands of fluctuations were once more emanated from the violet mink's mouth. After a short while, the Beast Emperor took a deep glance at Yan Yi before he said, Kid, you're really very lucky to have obtained its acknowledgement. Once he finished saying this, he gazed once more at the violet mink and said, I agree to your requirements. The violet mink nodded, and then it gazed at Yan Yi and revealed a faint smile. Even though he didn't know what the little fellow and the Beast Emperor were talking about, he was clearly aware that the Beast Emperor's request had troubled the little fellow. Moreover, the little fellow had probably agreed in the end because of him. When he thought up to here, Yan Yi's heart felt warm, and he said, I too feel that I'm very fortunate to be able to encounter the little fellow. The violet mink immediately revealed a brilliant smile on its round and plump face upon hearing what Yan Yi said, and then it flashed onto Yan Yi's shoulder before it rubbed its forehead against Yan Yi's face. A wisp of shock flashed through the Beast Emperor's eyes when he witnessed this scene. In the beginning, he felt that the violet mink might have had no choice but to stay by Yan Yi's side, or it was because of certain reasons related to its interests. However, this man and mink were probably not just companions now. When he associated this with the conditions that had discussed with the violet mink just now, the Beast Emperor knew that he had to completely change the way he treated Yan Yi. When he thought up to here, the Beast Emperor hesitated slightly before he flicked his finger towards Yan Yi, and then a strand of gold light directly entered Yan Yi's body. Yan Yi's entire body shook while he felt as if something had been added to his body, yet he was unable to sense it. He immediately suppressed the shock and bewilderment in his heart before he gazed at the Beast Emperor and spoke in a puzzled tone. Senior, what's this? It's an armor. The Beast Emperor smiled as he said. It's called the Violet Gold Armor. It was once a low-grade heaven rank armor, but it can only be considered to be at the high grade of the earth rank right now. A heaven rank armor. Yan Yi instantly gasped. My God! A heaven rank armor. The heaven rank. Yan Yi was slightly unable to maintain his calm. Presently, his physical body wasn't inferior to an ordinary spirit rank dark beast, and now that he possessed this armor, he wondered how abnormal his physical defense was right now. Don't get excited, the Beast Emperor said. Didn't I just tell you? It can only be considered to be a high-grade earth rank armor now, and it's much weaker when compared to its prime. Yan Yi's mind cleared up slightly when he heard this. Even though the low-grade heaven rank and the high-grade earth rank were only a level away, Yan Yi understood what that little bit represented. It was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. After pondering deeply for a moment, Yan Yi said, Senior, according to my knowledge, it shouldn't be easy for a heaven-ranked treasure's quality to be downgraded, right? The Beast Emperor smiled and said, That's true. Even an Exalt Realm expert would find destroying a heaven-ranked treasure to be extremely difficult. But if it's me… Ha! Yang Yi couldn't help but laugh bitterly when he heard the Beast Emperor. Indeed, it was undoubtedly a wishful dream if an ordinary person wanted to destroy a heaven-ranked treasure. However, was this middle-aged man who stood before him an ordinary person? Even though this armor is useless to me, it's extremely useful for you at your current realm of cultivation, said the Beast Emperor. Yang Yi shook his head and laughed bitterly. Even though a high-grade earth-ranked treasure was very good, how could it compare to a heaven-ranked treasure? But Yang Yi was able to accept this fact because having something was better than having nothing. When he thought up to here, Yang Yi cupped his fist towards the Beast Emperor and said, Thank you, Senior, for the gift. But I'm slightly curious. How was this heaven-ranked treasure downgraded to the earth rank? Because the owner of this armor forcefully withstood a punch of mine, the Beast Emperor said. That human survived because of this armor. However, the equipment spirit within this armor perished. Once it lost its equipment spirit, this armor could only be considered to be ordinary, and if it wasn't out of consideration for how that equipment spirit had loyally protected its master, I would have tossed this armor away a long time ago. What was the cultivation of that fellow who suffered a punch from Senior? Asked Yang Yi in a low voice. The Beast Emperor glanced at Yang Yi and said, The Exalt Realm. However, he wasn't an ordinary Exalt Realm expert. Of course, if it wasn't for the loyal protection of this armor's equipment spirit, then he would have been unable to resist a punch of mine no matter how much of a monstrous genius he was. Yang Yi's eyelids twitched when he heard this. An Exalt Realm expert had actually relied on a heaven-ranked treasure to survive a single punch from this Beast Emperor. Doesn't that mean that if an Exalt Realm expert doesn't possess a heaven-ranked treasure, it would be impossible for that Exalt Realm expert to even withstand a single punch from the Beast Emperor? Yang Yi was shocked. Exactly how strong is the Beast Emperor? This armor could originally take human form to assist its owner in battle, and it would automatically protect its owner when its owner was in danger. However, now that it has lost its equipment spirit, it merely possesses the ability of a defensive dark treasure. Moreover, it won't automatically defend its owner anymore. In other words, you have to activate it with your profound energy in the future. You can give it a try right now, said the Beast Emperor. Yang Yi nodded when he heard this, and then the profound energy within his body surged. In an instant, a thin violet gold-colored armor formed from energy had appeared on him, and besides his head, it covered his entire body and even his arms. Yang Yi couldn't help but feel excited when he gazed at the violet gold-colored energy armor that covered his entire body. Even though he hadn't witnessed its defensive abilities with his own two eyes, he was able to sense how terrifying it was. In other words, when the strength of his physical body was combined with the defensive ability of the violet gold armor, an ordinary King Realm expert would be unable to harm him at all. The Beast Emperor suddenly asked, Right, do you still have that command token I gave you? Yang Yi was stunned when he heard this. If the Beast Emperor hadn't mentioned, Yang Yi would have almost forgotten the command token. He immediately flipped his palm and withdrew it. As he gazed at the command token in Yang Yi's palm, the Beast Emperor smiled and said, Kid, I have to say that you're stupid. Do you know what this command token represents? What does it represent? Yang Yi really didn't know. It represents my presence. The Beast Emperor smiled and said, With this command token in your possession, you can move freely through the entire Grand Myriad Mountains except for some forbidden areas of my Dark Beast Empire. Moreover, you can command dark beasts below the spirit rank. If you'd withdrawn this command token when you were surrounded that day, then you would have been able to avoid all the trouble that you encountered at that time. Command dark beasts below the spirit rank? Yang Yi was shocked. He hadn't imagined that this command token actually possessed such a function. Even though it was merely dark beasts below the spirit rank, it was still extremely terrifying to be able to command the dark beasts in the Grand Myriad Mountains. After all, the dark beasts on the Grand Myriad Mountains were in the billions. After a short while, Yan Yi suppressed the shock in his heart and said, "Senior, why? Why?" The Beast Emperor chuckled and glanced at the violet mink before he said, "It's naturally because of it. You ought to be clearly aware that besides dark beasts at the spirit rank or above, there are practically no dark beasts capable of resisting the terrifying bloodline pressure possessed by the little fellow. Since it's like that, then why wouldn't I just give both of you the convenience?" Yang Yi laughed dryly when he heard this. Obviously, the Beast Emperor knew about the little fellow terrifying groups of dark beasts. Indeed, there really were practically no dark beasts below the spirit rank who could resist his terrifying bloodline pressure. Moreover, the little fellow's strength had improved once more, so it was probably not just king-rank dark beasts that couldn't resist the little fellow's bloodline pressure. Even some spirit-rank dark beasts would probably be unable to resist its bloodline pressure as well. "You're heading to the ancient battlefield to seize karmic luck?" The Beast Emperor had spoken in a low voice. Yang Yi was stunned. He didn't know why the Beast Emperor had asked this question, but he immediately nodded and said, "I promised the founding ancestor that I would represent the Grand Qin Empire to seize karmic luck." The Beast Emperor shook his head and said, "If it's possible, then don't go fight for the karmic luck and just stay in my Dark Beast Empire. In this way, you'll be able to keep your life." "Why do you say that, Senior?" Yang Yi frowned as he spoke these words. The Beast Emperor raised his head and gazed towards the south, and then he sighed lightly and said, "You should probably be aware that the relationship between the 6 great powers and the Grand Qin Empire isn't harmonious. Presently, the Grand Qin Empire is like the blazing sun in the midday sky, and its forces have already aroused fear in the Origin School and the other 5 great powers. Moreover, the founding emperor possesses lofty aspirations and intends to annihilate those extraordinary sections. In other words, a battle will erupt sooner or later between the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers. At this moment, you're representing the Grand Qin Empire to fight for karmic. It would be fine if your accomplishments were bad or you were killed in the ancient battle. However, if you succeeded, then do you think the 6 great powers would let you live?" Yang Yi fell silent when he heard this. He hadn't thought about all of this in the past. When the Beast Emperor spoke of it now, he suddenly realized that had been swept into a vortex between these great powers without him even realizing it. Moreover, being swept into such a vortex with the strength he possessed now would definitely cause him to be crushed into pieces. However, Yang Yi laughed bitterly, shook his head, and said, "Senior, I appreciate your good intentions. However, I've made an agreement with the founding ancestor, and I would represent the Empire to seize karmic luck in exchange for the founding ancestor protecting my mother's life. For the sake of my mother, have no other choice." The Beast Emperor glanced at Yang Yi before he nodded slightly, and then he said, "Never mind. Since you're heading to the ancient battlefield, then it'll give you some fortune. I hope you'll be able to provide my Dark Beast race with some help after you arrive there." As soon as he finished speaking, the Beast Emperor suddenly stretched out his hand and touched the center of Yang Yi's forehead with his finger, and then a strand of terrifying energy surged from his finger into Yang Yi. As a strand of pure energy surged incessantly into his body, Yang Yi's eyes gradually opened wide because he noticed that the Beast Emperor was actually forcefully improving his cultivation right now. This discovery shocked Yang Yi because the forceful improvement of his cultivation was very likely to cause irreparable harm to him. Strictly speaking, it could even cause him to be unable to advance from the King realm. What exactly does the Beast Emperor intend to do? Unfortunately, he was utterly unable to resist right now, and he could only allow the Beast Emperor to forcefully pour that pure energy into him. Chapter 292 The King Realm. After an unknown period of time, the Beast Emperor suddenly withdrew his hands. At the same time, a terrifying imposing aura surged out from Yang Yi's body. The Beast Emperor grinned before he waved his hand lightly, and the terrifying imposing aura instantly vanished. A wisp of admiration and surprise flashed through the Beast Emperor's eyes as he gazed at Yang Yi, who still had his eyes closed tightly. Because he noticed that had underestimated the natural talent and potential that Yang Yi possessed. According to his initial estimates, Yan Yi would be able to endure his energy for 15 minutes at most. However, Yan Yi had endured it for almost 4 hours. Even a spirit realm expert would find it difficult to endure his energy for 4 hours. However, Yan Yi, who was merely at the first heaven realm, had accomplished such feat. At the same time that the Beast Emperor felt shocked by this, he was slightly puzzled. He was puzzled about the reason why Yan Yi was able to endure so much energy. After quite some time passed, Yan Yi opened his eyes slowly, and then he instantly gasped after he checked his body. Because he noticed that he was already at the King Realm. My God! I'd just advanced by 2 ranks, yet I've actually advanced by a realm now. Isn't such speed a little too terrifying? He didn't feel any pleasant surprise, and he only felt shocked. Because excessive use of external forces to improve his cultivation would definitely cause irreparable damage to his body. When he thought up to here, Yan Yi gazed at the Beast Emperor and said, "Senior!" The Beast Emperor waved his hand and interrupted Yan Yi. "Kid, I know what you want to say, and I know what you're worried about as well. There's no need to be worried. The reason I improved your cultivation by force was that your foundation is extremely solid. Moreover, the toughness of your physical body and meridians far exceed an ordinary King Realm expert. In other words, you've already satisfied all conditions to attain the King Realm, and the only reason you haven't advanced was that you lacked a critical factor." Yan Yi couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when he heard this. "It's fine so long as it doesn't cause me to suffer from any undetectable injuries." When he thought up to here, he bowed solemnly to the Beast Emperor and said, "Thank you for your assistance, Senior. I'll never forget this kindness." Had spoken these words sincerely. Because if it wasn't for the Beast Emperor, then it would probably take some time for him to advance into the King Realm, and he was truly not confident in his ability to face those monstrous geniuses at the ancient battlefield while still at the first heaven realm. Now that had advanced into the King Realm, then would he, Yan Yi, have to fear anyone in the same realm of cultivation? The Beast Emperor grinned and said, "There's no need to thank me. I'll need your help in the future. I only hope that you wouldn't refuse when the time comes. May I know what Senior needs my help with?" Yan Yi was puzzled. The Beast Emperor possessed extraordinary strength, yet actually said that he needed Yan Yi's help, and this caused Yan Yi to be very bewildered. "You'll know when the time comes." The Beast Emperor smiled, and then he said with a serious expression, "I know you have a proud character and would rather die than submit. However, you absolutely must not cause trouble within Ancient Domain City after you arrive at the ancient battlefield. Especially the enforcement team. Please be sure to commit this to memory." Yan Yi's expression couldn't help but turn solemn when he heard this. It's even able to make an existence like the Beast Emperor seem fearful. Exactly what sort of existence is that enforcement team? Yan Yi pondered deeply for a moment before he asked. "Senior, what sort of team is that? Besides that, what's the Ancient Domain City? You don't even know about Ancient Domain City, yet you dare to head to the ancient battlefield by yourself." The Beast Emperor smiled and said, "Ancient Domain City is the one and only city on the ancient battlefield. Once you leave the territory of the Dark Beast Empire, the Ancient Domain City is the only city for an area of a few 100,000 kilometers around the ancient battlefield. Ancient Domain City is a place one must pass in order to arrive at the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. So, all those monstrous geniuses that have come to seize karmic luck would choose to reside there for some time while waiting for the Hidden Dragon Pagoda to open. In other words, all the monstrous geniuses of the entire continent would make an appearance there during this period of time." "All the monstrous geniuses of the entire continent?" Yan Yi frowned and said, "Then wouldn't Ancient Domain City be extremely chaotic?" "Chaotic?" The Beast Emperor shook his head and said, "No, it won't. Because there's order in the city, and the ones who maintain the order there are 3 9th-rank sects of the Central Territory, an extraordinary demon beast clan of the Demon Territory, and a few extraordinary powers from the Nether Territory and Devil Territory. No one dares to act rashly there when it's managed by these extraordinary powers." 9th-rank sects? Yan Yi frowned and said, "Senior, sects are divided by ranks as well?" "Of course," the Beast Emperor said, Besides the Southern Territory, the sects of the other territories are divided by ranks. Perhaps you're not aware of what being a 9th rank sect represents. Allow me to explain. If the strongest sect in the Southern Territory, the Origin School, was placed in the Central Territory, then it would be a 3rd rank sect, and it might even be unable to be considered a 3rd rank sect. Yang Yi was shocked when he heard this. He hadn't seen those 9th rank sects, but had seen the Origin School. The strength that the Origin School revealed occasionally had already shocked him to the extreme. Not to mention that the Origin School had an extraordinary expert like Yuan Tian. However, even then, the Origin School could actually only be considered as a 3rd rank sect in the Central Territory. How terrifying are 9th rank sects! The world is extremely large. The Beast Emperor gazed at Yang Yi and said, It's much larger than you've imagined. If you have the chance in the future, then travel the world. You'll notice that we're truly too tiny in this world. Besides that, it should be possible for you to join a good sect with the strength and potential you possess. Yang Yi chuckled. If he didn't have to rescue his mother, then leaving the Southern Territory to visit the other territories wasn't a bad idea. However, his mother was still suffering at the hands of the Flower Palace, so how could he possibly leave and head to the other territories? Yang Yi shook his head and said, Right, Senior, you told me not to offend the enforcement team just now. What sort of existence is the enforcement team that even Senior seems to be slightly afraid of them? The enforcement team was jointly established by those extraordinary powers. The Beast Emperor had a slightly solemn expression as he said, The objective of their establishment is to maintain the order in the ancient battlefield and the ancient domain city. Of course, their main objective is the fight for the karmic luck in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Which power wouldn't want to take full possession of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda? However, everyone is clearly aware that not a single power in the continent is capable of seizing full possession of it. So, they had no choice but to join forces and take possession of it. As for the Hidden Dragon list, ha ha ha! It was merely something that was created to console those smaller powers. When he spoke up to hear, the Beast Emperor glanced at Yang Yi and said in a low voice, Kid, remember that you absolutely must not offend the enforcement team. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to survive no matter how many lives you possess. I'm not trying to scare you. Once you offend them, then you'll definitely die even if you flee to the Origin School's headquarters. They are that formidable? Said Yang Yi in a surprised tone. The weakest member amongst them is at the Exalt realm. What do you think? Said the Beast Emperor in a flat tone. The corners of Yang Yi's mouth twitched when he heard this. The weakest is at the exact realm. That what about the strongest? Indeed, even the Beast Emperor would probably be unable to save him if such a force pursued him. The Beast Emperor spoke slowly. Right, even though there's order in the city, the order there is unlike the Grand Qin Empire. The so-called order there is one where others shouldn't harm the interests of those extraordinary powers. Moreover, everything there is governed by strength. In other words, so long as you don't harm the interests of those extraordinary sects, then you should fight when you have to, and you should even strike lethally. Only in that way would you be able to reduce the amount of trouble you face. Yang Yi nodded and then he said, I'm naturally aware of that. When he spoke up to hear, Yang Yi bowed once more to the Beast Emperor and said, Senior, I'll never forget the kindness you've shown me this time. If Senior needs any help from me in the future, then I'll definitely not refuse so long as it's within the scope of my ability. Repaying enmity with enmity and kindness with kindness, this was the principle which Yang Yi acted upon. Even though the Beast Emperor had mostly helped him because of the little fellow, he couldn't erase the kindness that the Beast Emperor had shown him, and he had to repay it. The Beast Emperor smiled and said, You're a loyal person that attaches great importance to his relationships. I believe you, and I believe the little fellow's judgment. As for the thing I need your help with, I'll tell you about it in the future. Your strength is still too low now, and you're unable to be of help to me. Yang Yi nodded and said, Since it's like that, then Senior can come looking for me when you think I have the ability to accomplish it. If there's nothing else, then I'll be bidding my farewells. The Beast Emperor nodded and said, I'll send you there. As soon as he finished speaking, the Beast Emperor waved his hand, and then Yan Yi instantly vanished on the spot. As he gazed at the spot where Yan Yi vanished from, the Beast Emperor fell silent, and then he chuckled after a long time and said, "Founding Emperor. Oh, Founding Emperor. Old geezer Zui as well. Both of your insides will definitely turn green from regret for giving up on this kid. How could he be an ordinary person when he is able to make a spatial mink, which is an ancient variant beast, follow him? Moreover, it's even a spatial mink with violet pupils that's rare to come by even in 10,000 years. The enlightened sword heart? Haha. The enlightened sword heart is nothing when compared to the mysteries hidden within him." As soon as he finished speaking, the Beast Emperor roared with laughter, and then his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After an unknown period of time, Yan Yi regained his consciousness, and then he shook his head and slowly opened his eyes. He was instantly shocked when he saw the scene before him. An extremely grand and enormous city was standing before him. Why was it called an enormous city? Because the walls of the city were over a kilometer in height. As for their width, in any case, he wasn't able to see the end of it even with the sight he possessed as an expert at the King realm. This ancient city could be said to be the grandest and most imposing city Yan Yi had ever laid eyes on, and even the imperial capital of the Grand Qin Empire couldn't compare to it. In next to no time, Yan Yi's gaze descended towards the center of the ancient city because 3 words were inscribed there: ancient domain city. Haha! Another newbie is here! Let's see which entrance he'll take from amongst the heaven, earth, man, and dog entrance. Will he take the man entrance or the dog entrance? Right when Yan Yi was shocked by the grandeur of the ancient domain city, a ridiculing voice had suddenly resounded from the side. Chapter 293 4 Entrances. Yan Yi withdrew his gaze and looked towards the source of the voice. He saw a group of young men standing ahead, and they had their arms crossed while they gazed at him with mocking gazes. As soon as he laid eyes on them, Yan Yi knew that they were from the other territories because it was impossible for someone from the southern territory to not recognize him. He wasn't being narcissistic, and it was instead because he had practically become the public enemy of the younger generation in the entire southern territory. So if they were from the southern territory, then how could they possibly not recognize him? Yan Yi withdrew his gaze because he recalled the Beast Emperor's words, and he decided not to pay any attention to them. After that, he started walking towards the entrance to the city. However, had merely taken a few steps before he stopped once more because there were 4 entrances in front of him. The entrance on the left was the largest. It was 150 m tall, around 100 m wide, and it was constructed extremely luxuriously. Because Yan Yi noticed to his shock that this entrance was actually created from earth-rank gold steel. It was materials at the earth rank. And it was even gold steel. Gold steel was an existence that was much harder than iron. Such a treasure was extremely rare even in a sect like the Sword Sect. Yet now, it had been made into the entrance of the city. Even the Talisman Masters Association isn't so extravagant. Yan Yi suppressed the short in his heart, while his gaze shot towards the center of the top of the entrance. There were 2 large words inscribed there in violet gold: Heaven Entrance. In next to no time, Yan Yi had another shocking discovery, and it was the 2 people that were standing at the sides of the Heaven Entrance. They had extremely ordinary appearances, but they were spirit realm experts. Exactly what is this Heaven Entrance? It actually needs spirit realm experts to guard it? After a moment of silence, Yan Yi moved his gaze and looked towards the entrance beside the Heaven Entrance. This entrance was much smaller when compared to the Heaven Entrance, and it wasn't made from earth-rank gold steel anymore. It was made from a profound rank rock called fortified steel. Even though fortified steel was extremely precious as well, it was undoubtedly extremely inferior when compared to earth-rank gold steel. Just like the Heaven Entrance, there were 2 people guarding this entrance, and they were spirit realm experts as well. However, their auras were much weaker when compared to the 2 experts standing in front of the Heaven Entrance. There were 2 words inscribed at the top of this entrance as well, but it wasn't Heaven Entrance, and it was earth entrance instead. Yan Yi moved his gaze away towards the entrance beside the earth entrance. Yan Yi was slightly speechless when he saw this entrance because it was truly slightly shabby when compared to the two entrances from before. This entrance was around 1.5 m tall while its width wasn't even 1.5 m. In other words, it was just nice for a single person to pass through. Yan Yi couldn't help but shake his head and smile when he saw the words "man entrance" above the entrance. This entrance is really worthy of its name. Yan Yi shook his head and looked at the final entrance, and he was instantly stunned when he saw it. Because instead of calling this final entrance an entrance, it should be called a hole. Moreover, it was an extremely small hole. If someone wanted to enter through this hole, then one had to crawl through it. In other words, it wasn't an entrance at all. Yan Yi raised his head, and he couldn't help but frown when he saw the words inscribed at the top of it. Because the words there was "dog entrance." After staying silent on the spot for some time, Yan Yi shook his head. Isn't it just a few entrances? Is there any need to hesitate? Once he straightened out his thoughts, Yan Yi stopped hesitating and walked towards the heaven entrance. At this moment, more and more people had arrived in front of the entrance, and the few dozens of people from before had grown to a few hundreds of people. They instantly stopped moving when they saw Yan Yi walking towards the heaven entrance, and then all of them gazed at Yan Yi. Moreover, their gazes seemed as if they were looking at a freak. What the fuck? The heaven entrance! He actually chose the heaven entrance. Could it be that he's an extraordinary genius from the 3/9 rank sects of the Central Territory? But he looks very unfamiliar. Moreover, based on his dressing, he doesn't seem like someone from our Central Territory. But if he isn't from our Central Territory, then which territory would be able to foster such a formidable fellow that dares to take the heaven entrance? Could it be that formidable experts can only come from your Central Territory? Perhaps he's from our Northern Territory. Haha! If he's from our Northern Territory, then our Northern Territory will truly gain face this time. Haha! Humph! Perhaps he's from our Western Territory. The Western Territory? Why don't you say he's from the Southern Territory? Not to mention fostering someone that can take the heaven entrance, it's impossible for savage places like your Western Territory and the Southern Territory to foster someone that can even traverse the Earth entrance. The Southern Territory? Tui! Don't compare my Western Territory with such trash! They didn't even have a single person that could pass through the Earth entrance, and half of them crawled in through the dog entrance. They completely disgraced themselves. Stop talking about meaningless things. Let's see if this fellow can pass through the heaven entrance. TSK, TSK. If I'm not wrong, then not a single person has passed through the heaven entrance until now, right? Indeed. Those extraordinary geniuses from the 3/9 rank sects of the Central Territory, the Demon Territory, the Nether Territory, and the Devil Territory haven't arrived yet. So, up until now, not a single person has passed through the heaven entrance. Not even one? Haha. Won't there be one now? Yan Yi hadn't thought much about it when he came to the heaven entrance because he merely felt that since the heaven entrance was so huge, then why should he take the smaller entrances? But now, when he sensed a variety of strange gazes coming from the surroundings, Yan Yi knew that there was definitely something different about the so-called heaven entrance. But it's fine. I can't just stop, right? When he thought up to here, Yan Yi disregarded the gazes of the people in the surroundings and sped up. When the spirit realm experts standing at the sides of the heaven entrance saw Yan Yi walking over, their eyelids instantly twitched while they exchanged glances. There was no contempt and disdain in their eyes, and there was only a solemn and curious expression there. Because they were very clearly aware of what taking the heaven entrance meant, and it was absolutely impossible for one to attempt to use the heaven entrance unless that person was especially confident in his own strength. Haha! Right when Yan Yi was only around 10 away from the heaven entrance, loud laughter suddenly resounded from behind the crowd. The crowd was just about to turn around and look over when a sharp whistle suddenly resounded. After that, a young man in white robe had appeared mysterious in front of Yan Yi. The young man was around 20 years of age, His long hair hung loosely on his shoulders, his eyes were filled with spirit, a faint smile hung on the corners of his mouth, and his hands were placed behind his back. Even though he didn't display it on purpose, the crowd was still able to clearly sense the wild aura he had. The young man sized up Ancient Domain City before he chuckled and said, "This is Ancient Domain City? Not bad. Not bad." It didn't disappoint this young master. After a light exclaim of surprise, the young man glanced at the 4 entrances and said, "This is the entrances of dignity that the first city governor of Ancient Domain City created? The dog entrance? Ha ha! How interesting." Meanwhile, one of the spirit realm experts who stood at the sides of the entrances had taken a step forward and gazed at the young man as he shouted in a low voice, "State your identity." The young man smiled indifferently and said, "Shiluo from the Central Territories and the sect. People call me Young Master Shiluo. Am 20 years of age and at the peak of the King Realm. Right, it should be the half-step spirit realm. The endless sect's Young Master Shiluo." Countless people in the surroundings had instantly gasped when they heard the young man's self-introduction, and their gazes towards the young man were filled with shock and excitement. A genius from the Central Territory couldn't help but cry out involuntarily in a frenzied voice, "He's one of the 3 outstanding geniuses from the Central Territory, Young Master Shiluo. My God! It's actually him. Oh my God! I've actually met him in person." This genius couldn't be blamed for losing his composure because the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory might not have a great reputation in the other territories, but they were renowned throughout the Central Territory. They were from the 3 ninth-rank sects of the Central Territory. Moreover, they were the most outstanding disciples in the younger generation of their respective sects. Of course, if it was merely for this reason, then it wasn't a big deal. Most importantly, the 3 of them had once jointly killed an Exalt Realm expert. It wasn't an Exalt Realm expert that had been heavily injured or had advanced by utilizing the assistance of treasures. It was an Exalt Realm expert that had cultivated all the way on his own. How terrifying was such an expert! However, it was exactly such an expert that had been annihilated by the joint forces of these 3 youth. All 3 of them became renowned after that battle, and it was also that battle that created the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory. It could be said that the 3 of them represented the overall strength of the Central Territory's younger generation. On the other hand, amongst the 5 human territories, which were the Eastern, Western, Southern, Northern, and Central Territories, the Central Territory was considered the strongest. In other words, the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory could be said to represent the entire strength of the younger generation of the humans in Profounder Continent. Of course, the geniuses from the Demon Territory, Nether Territory, and Devil Territory were definitely not inferior to these 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory, but all 3 of these territories didn't belong to the humans. When he heard the young man's self-introduction, the eyelids of that spirit realm expert twitched. Had heard of young Master Shiluo's reputation because he was from the Central Territory as well. However, he was on duty to guard Ancient Domain City throughout the year, so had never met young Master Shiluo in person. The expression of this spirit realm expert eased up, and then he nodded slightly and said in a light voice, "You ought to be aware of the heaven entrances, might. If this young man before him could be said to be representing the entire Central Territory, so this spirit realm expert naturally didn't want young Master Shiluo to die in the heaven entrance. Because if that happened, then the Central Territory wouldn't just lose an extraordinary expert, it was very likely for the Central Territory to become the laughingstock of the other territories. However, the spirit realm expert had merely completed half of his warning when young Master Shiluo had shaken his head and interrupted him. Young Master Shiluo said, "Thank you for your kind intentions, Senior. However, you ought to be clearly aware that all the disciples of the Endless Sect who've arrived at Ancient Domain City over the years have all gone through the heaven entrance. Even though many have died within the entrance, the disciples of my Endless Sect have never feared it. To speak some immodest words, I'm currently representing the entire Endless Sect. If I were to be afraid and refuse to use the heaven entrance, Then wouldn't I bring shame to the endless sect? You can die, but you can't bring shame to the endless sect. This is something the master of my endless sect once said. Moreover, I'm confident in my ability to pass through the heaven entrance. Awesome! As expected of one of the 3 outstanding geniuses from our central territory. Great! That spirit realm expert couldn't help but speak with excitement when he heard young Master Shiluo. It wasn't just this spirit realm expert who'd become excited when he heard young Master Shiluo. Even the young geniuses in the surroundings who were from the other territories couldn't help but reveal expressions of admiration towards young Master Shiluo. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.